Councilmember Wright.
Here.
Are there any council comments?
Wow, that's good.
We're in awe.
I have a couple. I just wanted to let folks know that Councilmember Robinson and I attended a meeting on Friday with Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Parks Division and city staff, and there was a very good discussion about a pilot project for establishing some community gardens. And this meeting was at the instigation of County Councilmember Valerie Urban, and there was a lot of good information exchanged, and I believe that Councilmember Robinson and Councilmember Wright are going to be setting up some community meetings in conjunction with Councilmember Urban to get some information out. This is to establish a pilot program in the county of community gardens in community parks, and they identified 3 parks, 2 of which are in Tacoma Park, and those 2 are Silver Spring Intermediate Park up across from Montgomery College and Sligo Overlook Park near the VFW in Pinecrest. And they have set up a very good program that I think has some real potential, and hopefully the neighborhoods will agree that those are good things to do, and Park and Planning is ready to do a lot of work to make it happen, and people will be hearing about that in the very near future. And I also just wanted to note that, excuse me, that we got notice that Karen McPherson, the children's librarian at the Tacoma Park Library, and a middle school student, Alana Natanson, have been named recipients of the John Philip Imroth Memorial Award presented by the American Library Association, recognizing some wonderful work that they did. And they get a citation and a $500 award. So I think that's very nice. And I also just wanted to point out the Tacoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission is having Shadow Play 1 Borderlands this Saturday here in the building, and it looks like a very interesting event, and that's at 8 o'clock on March 21. Now there's some more comments. Councilmember Rowe.
Thank you for reminding me about last Friday's meeting. I appreciate that, and I will just add a couple things. One is that the Pinecrest Neighborhood Association meeting, where we will discuss that, is tomorrow night at 7:30 at the VFW. And I'll add that the pace at which Park and Planning has mapped out their implementation of these community gardens is so fast that there'll be time, they think, to plant a crop this year, this spring. So,
Councilmember Wright.
Just wanted to remind people about 2 forums. One is the forum on the 26th of March in the Azalea Room here at 7:30, which is to give WSSC feedback on how we feel about their current performance and ask them questions. If you have questions that are particularly complex, we would suggest you email them or call your city council member with them so they can get them to WSSC in advance. The second is that on March 24th in Rockville, in the Executive Office Building, there will be a forum about the actual ride-on changes. I think it's at 6:30 in 101 Monroe Street. So if people are concerned about the proposed changes, not just to the 25 bus, but to any of the changes that they're proposing in the area, they should definitely go and have their voices heard. I think you need to sign up early, probably if you're going to have a chance of testifying. I think you have to do that by tomorrow.
Just a note too that we will have use the city's bus to take some folks to that public forum if necessary, and to call the Peggy Washington's line, and we can get you signed up.
And just want to say I enjoyed the Piney Branch Pool again on Sunday. It was quite a good turnout of people, and still would like us, the city, to understand from Adventist Community Services what numbers they're actually looking at in terms of keeping the pool open, what hours, and understand what their goals and targets are, and kind of understand where we are in terms of meeting them. I would ask the city manager for that in the past, and she's probably
Which reminds me that I should note that we're joined by the Deputy City Manager tonight. The City Manager is not here. Next item on the agenda is adoption of minutes for January 21st. Does somebody want to move adoption?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are adopted unanimously. There are no additional agenda items, and I don't have any particular scheduling update, so we'll move to the public comment period. If anybody'd like to make any comments on any items that are not either the subject of the public hearing tonight or the special session items, we welcome your comments. Please identify yourself, and please keep them to 3 minutes.
Yep, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, Ward 4. Want to make a couple of announcements that you people might want to know about. On Friday the 21st, Friday the 20th, my date's right, we're having a memorial service and a memorial demonstration for William Thomas, the peace activist who held that Proposition 1 vigil in front of the White House for the last 27 years. He passed away last month. And at 12 o'clock noon, we're having a gathering in Lafayette Park, also called Peace Park. And we'll be doing that on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. At 12 o'clock noon, we'll be gathering there. We'll be having drumming down there. We'll be having, different events going on down there and everything. And also on Saturday, we're gathering at 23rd and Constitution Avenue for a march to the Pentagon because it's the 6th anniversary of the war in Iraq. You know, we've destroyed Iraq, we've destroyed our own economy, we spent over $1 trillion in warfare, and never mind the count of the irreplaceable human lives that we've lost on our side and on the Iraqis. So that we'll be gathering there at 12 o'clock noon at 23rd and Constitution for the march to the Pentagon. And I'd like to see everybody come out if they can. Also, I want to ask the city if they have any, of an unusual problem that's turned up lately. I know somebody who's on Medicare, and her doctors they're not treating her right. They're pretty much just sugarcoating her and making her feel good emotionally, and sending her home, and she can hardly breathe right. Last year, she was able to come down and help walk us down to the polls and everything. And now she needs a wheelchair to get around, and she can hardly even breathe right. She had to walk down to my apartment using a walker, and she couldn't even hardly turn the doorknob, and I had to send her up to the emergency room. All they did was did a chest x-ray, and apparently they just held her overnight and sent her home the next day. No stress test on the heart, no cardiac catheterization, no echocardiogram, and no ultrasound, no nothing. They just sent her home. And she was worse than I was, when I was short of breath. And I know that they should do everything they can when someone's short of breath. And she's not that old. And I've heard from other seniors, too, that they're getting the same problem. Is there a number that this city can post in every apartment building that if they don't feel they're getting the right treatment and they're feeling that they're getting, shunted aside, that they can call to get proper treatment for? Is there any number that this city can post? Because this lady and these other people are getting sicker and sicker, and they need help. They're human beings, too. And I know what it was like to get that at one time. But other people are not so lucky. And also, I'd like to say hi to Diana Cole, and I hope she's feeling much better tonight. Thank you very much. Peace delegates from Tacoma Park. Meet me at the demonstrations, everybody, and work for peace.
Thanks for your comments, and we'll see if there's any information we come up with.
We need to get a number posted in every senior building so that these people can get help if they need it. And they have a place to turn.
I was just going to say, Pat, that I'll get with you after this meeting or later this week and talk with you about the specific case and see if we can't get a phone number for you.
Yeah. We need it just not for this case, but other cases that come up. Because I'm sure she's not the only one.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to make any public comment?
Hello, good evening. I'm Pat Rumbaugh. I live on Maple. And, yeah, another Pat. Last summer, I became aware that there are play days all over the United States. And you might say that I'm a little bit involved in play. I'm a physical education teacher and coach tennis currently at the Washington International School. I've been there 28 years and have coached in Tacoma Park. And basically, I found out about these play days and decided why not have one in Tacoma Park. And last night, for the first time, if you haven't already heard this, we had our Tacoma Park Play Committee, and we got together up at the Old Tacoma Business Association, which is where we plan on meeting next Sunday night at 7:30. And I'd like you to all to feel welcome to either join our committee or to consider possibly in the future helping out in some way. You can reach me by my cell phone or my email. Should I give that, or?
I'd give your email. I wouldn't give your cell phone.
Okay, all right, I'll give my cell phone. It's Pat, and then PATTENN58@AOL.com. We're trying to get this information out to all the listservs so that people will feel free to, if they're interested in play, basically we're saying to people, if you're passionate about play and you'd like to see Tacoma Park become a more playful city, then come on out and join us. Recently, a friend of mine, Dr. Stuart Brown, who's the founder of the National Institute for Play, wrote this book, Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. I found myself shouting in a good way that I've believed this and now it's really true. Well, it's in writing in a book, that how important play is for all of us. I also, with a local photographer who grew up in Tacoma Park, I wrote this children's book that now I have an agent, actually, so I'm excited about that. And we're starting to work on Let's Play Outside in a few weeks, soon as the blossoms start budding. But anyway, I hope all of you that enjoy play will consider joining us. Yes, sir.
Yes, I wonder if you could tell me again the date, time, and location of your next meeting?
Yes. It's going to be next Sunday, March 22nd at 7:30 p.m., and it's going to be in the Old Town Tacoma Business Association office, which is at 6935 Laurel Avenue. It's upstairs above SunTrust Bank and Video Americana. We hope to have something so you can buzz there and we can let you in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
That reminds me, your comments remind me of what the chair of the commission, the Park and Planning Commission, said to us on Friday. Now you got me thinking about that, Mayor Williams, and now I'm still thinking about it. He made a kind of a joke about getting kids outside, and his joke was that it's part of the No Child Left Inside movement. That was pretty good.
Are there any other people who want to make any public? Yep, sorry.
First, I wanted to say thank you, Matt, for your efforts on this. Second thing is, I wonder if we might be able to post this to the city website, and, you know, like we have Arbor Day. I know it's not for a while, but post the fact that it's happening and information to contact Pat. And then, Pat, I've been in that office, and it's a little bit small, so I know as the numbers build for people who are interested in helping out and volunteering, you know, definitely we can get a room here at the community center to hold the meetings as well.
There is a community calendar on the website.
Great.
Okay. Anybody else who'd like to make any comments?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tim Mail. I live on Woodland Avenue. And Councilmember Wright, your comment reminded me of the visits I've made to the pool. I've been there 7 or 8 times on both weekends and weeknights now. It's clearly not getting very much visitation. I mean, there's generally 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the pool. And I just wonder, on your suggestion, you know, how many people does it take to keep the pool open? Maybe if you found that data, you could either start posting it close to real time, or at least try to get some stories in local media about it. Because then there's a record that, you know, people aren't using it or people are using it. it creates an opportunity for more people to respond to that, to say, hey, you know what, no one's using the pool. We campaign to get the pool open. Let's go out there and try to generate more use of it, or not. But it would just make that a little more public, I think. So just a suggestion to try to post that information.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Bob Sheldon on Boyd Avenue. Councilmember Wright, when's the date of the WSOC meeting?
It's the 26th of March, 7:30 here in the Azalea Room.
Yeah, I have a real problem with WSOC work. I ride a bicycle to and from work, and I've been doing that for 35 years in D.C. The worst roads that I encounter are here in Tacoma Park because of WSOC's work, and particularly in downtown Tacoma Park, in Old Town, the roads are so cut up that it forces me into the driving lane, and it's a real danger. So I really encourage you to do this. And I was here at a meeting in January where there were several members of the Maryland legislature were here, and I brought this issue up, and things have actually gotten worse since then. I mean, the work that I see that they're doing and the damage they're doing to the road, and I don't see anything addressed at all. So I really applaud your making this effort to do that. And I hope that the City Council gets involved in seeing what's happening to our streets and monitors what WSCC does, because it's really atrocious. Thank you.
Thanks. And that meeting is going to be in this room.
Oh, we moved it to this room?
Yeah.
Great. And just, the District 20 delegation was, they really helped to get the WSOC here for the forum, so that they're still aware of the issue. And I think all of us up here are incredibly aware of the issue and have been asking the city staff. The city staff have been pushing WSHA to get WSOC to repave or remill and pave Carroll Avenue when the project's done. So
that's what the people told me when I was on that bike. That's what they told me last July.
they're not done on the project, and I know it doesn't give you any comfort when you're riding your bike, no pun intended, every day to work.
Thanks. Are there any other people who'd like to make any public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll move along. The next item is the city manager's comments.
Thank you. The council members stole my thunder on a couple items. Thanks very much for those, for the items on the Imroth Award and the right on public forum. I just want to mention briefly that I attended on Friday a workshop in Annapolis on the stimulus package and how the monies are going through the state of Maryland. It was heavily attended. It was packed. And I think there were a couple themes. One is that most of the information isn't known yet, and you have to just keep checking out on the websites for the various agencies and for the state government. The state government does have a pretty good website called at www.recovery.maryland, all spelled out, .gov. I think one of the major points is that the amount that the state is getting, while it's something, in no way meets the needs for the various projects that they have in mind to have done. And the way that the federal government is dealing with this is that for most of the projects, they have to be spent, half of it needs to be spent in about 120 days, and the other half has to be started within 180 days and completed within a year. And if it's not spent, they'll take it and they'll give it to a state that has a project. So Maryland is trying to have the projects ready to go and be done quickly and be in line for perhaps getting money from other states that aren't as ready to go. I was impressed with the level of attention to this at the state level. It really is quite profound. And the other thing that's, I know a number of people have asked about related to that are some of the monies that come a little more directly, like weatherization grants and that kind of thing. Those are simply piggybacking on existing programs. It's just a lot more money available for existing grants. So if you meet the criteria for those programs, a larger pool of people are able to be served. Right now there's some waiting lists and that kind of thing, and they're trying to make sure that everybody gets the funds that can use them. If people have questions, there you know, it's fine to contact us, but we're still checking the websites each day to see what the new criteria are, the new forms, or the new contact people. So it's a fast-moving animal. The other thing I'd like under this time period is an opportunity for Chief Rakucci to talk a little bit about speed cameras.
Welcome, Chief. Good evening. You all should have a copy of the press release we put out today, and speed cameras are now issuing warnings up till April 1st. To give you some background, just to go back, because I know you all, and basically most of us covered in the press release, I know speed cameras have been in the news quite a bit lately, and obviously I've been meeting very closely with Montgomery County and the other municipalities that are involved in it, and I've spoken to the mayor and obviously the city manager on several occasions. To remind council, this goes back to 2 years ago when I first came. One of the first things that Mayor Porter at the time asked me to look into speed cameras and report back, which we did a year later, and at that time, the police department recommended we not go any further based on the data we had collected at that point. We were asked by council to revisit the issue and look at some other streets in the city. When we did that, the data supported cameras on New Hampshire Avenue and on Ethan Allen, which are now installed and up and running. This was a very slow and deliberate process because being a small municipality, we didn't want to create speed traps or radar traps, as some people call them. I know one of the roads in Chevy Chase has gotten a lot of names. It's probably generated the most publicity. I think the roads we've picked are roads that obviously meet the criteria that's been set up throughout the county and with the other municipalities that shows obviously multiple violations occurring. I think I don't have to go very far, especially with Councilman Berry, when we talk about New Hampshire Avenue, how much effort has been put into that, how many committees, how much enforcement in the 2 years I've been here we've put into it. I think it's going to make a major difference. And I have to tell you, I rode out to New Hampshire today to take a look, and I parked my car and watched, and I was amazed this early on how many people are slowing down. And if we can get the message out, the ultimate goal that I'd like to be able to say in Tacoma Park is we took our speed cameras down because we got compliance, and that's the ultimate goal. It's not about revenue, it's about reducing accidents, it's about reducing the loss of life, it's about making our roads safer. And I think one of the probably the biggest issues I've heard in the 2 years here is about New Hampshire Avenue, the various problems we've had on it. And I think it's going to make a difference. Ethan Allen, in studying that, it's what we call an accelerated speed trap as you come flying into the city. And I think just the amount of accidents in that small stretch really amazed me. And I think it will make a difference. We will be reporting to the council periodically on what we're learning. Obviously, you'll be getting reports on the revenue as it comes in. But our ultimate goal is to reduce accidents. And in talking to the municipalities, and we've worked very closely with the city of Rockville, they have started reducing speeding complaints from 50 to 70%, and that's success. You reduce speeding, you reduce accidents, and it makes it a safer place for people to live. I think the revenue that we get is going to be used for some really good projects here in the city, mainly safe roadways, sidewalks, and different things that are listed in the press release. Obviously, it will help us in some enforcement projects we'd like to do, give us a little bit more money at a time when money's tight. But the bottom line is we want to reduce speed and accidents, and I think that's going to happen. There is a number in here. I would encourage our residents to call it if they have questions. Don't call your council members because they're just going to refer it to me. The number is 301-891-71. I take it back. 301-891-7138. And it's a special number. It's there 24 hours a day. Our officers will be checking it during the day for any questions, complaints. We've had a couple calls. I took care of one for Councilman Wright the other day. Simple questions people ask. But the biggest thing is I'm really pleased to see people are slowing down already. I rode by Friday evening. I rode up and down New Hampshire. I think it was between like 6:30 and 7. And I was amazed watching cars coming at me, how slowed down they were, and how they were slowing down. And that's what it's all about. And we're not even issuing citations, so I think we're getting the message out. I think there's been some, what I call bad press. We are the ultimate decider of any tickets that are issued. The contractor has nothing to do about it. We do it. We will be the ultimate person that goes to court. The contractor obviously is providing equipment and put everything up. Hasn't cost the city a penny to this point. Now we'll see what happens, but I think based on talking with the municipalities in Montgomery County, I think this is a good tool, and I think it's going to make a difference. Now, one of the questions people will raise, and you'll probably get asked, is, well, they all slow down and then they speed up when they leave there. Well, just so everyone knows, we have radar, and we'll be setting it up right up the road. It's called sufficient to slow people down if that's what they decide to do. So we want this to work. We want to make our city safer, and I think that's what it's going to do.
Chief Rakucci, could you mention again when the items start acting?
April 1st, April Fool's Day, we're for real.
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like the selection of locations. Of course, I hope to participate in that, but that stretch of New Hampshire Avenue is one of the most accident-prone. And I think I came through there today a couple of times, and it is impressive how slow people went through that section, a little bit below the 35-mile-an-hour speed limit.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. I noticed, too, that officers were out there with the contractor working on the devices. What's the level of involvement from Tacoma Park officers?
We have to go out there every day. We retain, we get the data. Eventually, we'll be able to set it up. We still have to go out there and reset it every day. We go out and make sure everything has not been tampered with and it's safe. Every day we will check it, and then eventually we'll be able to get some of the data brought right to our computers. They provide us with all the equipment, and then we'll have our computers. They do the processing as we issue a ticket, then they'll do the processing for it. I've probably got 1.5 officers assigned to it right now. And the one officer's on restricted duty, so that works out perfect, and then I have a sergeant that will be overseeing the project. It'll probably take, I'm guessing at this point, 25% of his time on some days, and may not be as much on other days, once we get into a good routine on how we're doing it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Snipper.
Yes, I also was out there watching. I was out there this morning in rush hour and on Saturday also to compare sort of slow days and busy days. And what I noticed is that as soon as a group of cars slow down, then everybody else slows down. So it's a nice, it's a little contagious, if you will, to figure out something's going on. And I do share your hope that folks will just get used to the idea that 35 or 40 is about as fast as you can go on that street. Because I've been on that New Hampshire stretch, like most of the council members, when the cars are really just 50, 55, 60. It's amazing.
I mean, the average speed of the tickets that we issued, it was in our press release, was over 50 miles per hour. I can tell you, because we're looking at the data before we went. Today is for real, doing the warning, but we've been looking at the data. It's been kind of shocking how many cars do go through there and are violating the law. I mean, it's been an eye-opener for us. I mean, I saw the data last summer when they did the study, but it's unfortunately, till people get used to it, the data really shows we got a real problem there. And it explains some of the accidents we've had. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, we had an accident down on University and where the new fence is. Yeah, it's only been up for about 2 months, and one car with a DUI behind it took out a part of the fence. As you well know, that's a special ordered fence, so now we have to wait a while before we get in. I mean, it's just a lot of things down in that corridor that needs to stop, and hopefully the speed cameras will help.
Councilmember Robinson.
Number check. Sometimes I'm Mr. Number Check. 413 accidents in 2007 and 2008. That's not a typo?
No, sir.
That's one every couple of days?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And that doesn't include the other side of PG up the road, which is just as bad.
Is that stretch from
That's
University?
all our stretch. It's all
University
Montgomery Park,
to
yeah.
Eastern? Okay.
Yeah.
And if I might comment, many, at least in my past knowledge of these accidents, many of them are just single cars just going too fast. Part of it is that the pavement is in poor quality, and it's part of why we have been lobbying to State Highway to have that also resurfaced, because if you do go over the speed limit, you think it's a big road, but the surface doesn't have the friction that it should have, and so it is quite dangerous.
Thanks very much, Chief.
Thank you, Mayor.
Did you have any? That's it? Okay.
I just had a quick follow-up question for the Deputy City Manager. If people want to use the bus to go, the city bus to go to the March 24th forum, are there particular places, either at the community center or the towers, times when the bus is leaving?
At this point, we're collecting names. We're probably picking up a group from Victory Towers at about 5:15 and Franklin soon after that. But we're kind of flexible to see if there's somebody that we need to pick up at a different location or if we need to stop here. So part of it is that we're trying to work with people to be as convenient as possible.
So if they're interested, they should contact you or Peggy or...
Actually, I'll say me because I'm here. Okay. I certainly know a lot about this. Suzanne Ludlow, and you can reach me at 301-891-7229 or look me up on the website.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the public hearing on the council's strategic plan and priorities. And see if there's anybody signed up, and I'll just say that the council has been working on this for, I guess, about a year. And it was as a result of looking at what we were doing in the past, which was setting priorities for the term of the council, and we decided we needed to have a little bit wider vision of where we might be going, and not just set priorities and then start all over again with the next council for another 2 years, but to have a living document that we could put a lot of work into at the beginning and then revisit every year as we look at our priorities and fine-tune various pieces in the strategic plan. And so we have it at this point where we are ready to get some comments on it and then finalize it, adopt it, and go forward. And we have one person who signed up, and that's Tim Mayle. And then anybody else who wishes to comment can do so after he does.
Thank you. And I have 2 minutes, is that right?
3 minutes.
Okay, great. I put together a letter with other residents of Ward 1, 2, and 3. So I reviewed the plan, talked to some other people about it, wrote a letter. I have copies of this, I think, for all of you, which I'll bring up or give to you in a couple minutes. And just going through it quickly, I do strategic plans for a living through environmental work. And so I'm familiar with sort of the structure and purpose of them. And I'll just go through comments really quickly, shorthand this. Strategic plans cannot be all things to all people. You have to make choices, as not everything can be among the most important goals for your next 5 years. The 3 goals that you lay out are really more like 9 or 10 goals because they talk about environmental sustainability and physical sustainability in the same sentence. Those are really separate things. And I guess we would urge you to instead, in the executive summary for this plan, reference the 2000 master plan, reference the Tacoma 2010 report, and be even more targeted and strategic in the goals that you emphasize in this plan. In terms of environmental issues, we felt that there was inadequate treatment for environmental sustainability, in particular too few strategies and too few goals for the next 5 years associated with that. And then in particular, we made a recommendation that that the council and that the plan talk more explicitly about Sligo Creek as a highly polluted waterway within our community. It's a focal point for many residents in terms of recreation and activities, to set some goals, the more explicit action-oriented goals for Sligo Creek. We think it's great that you report on lots of indicators, that for each section of the plan there are indicators. That's fabulous, and we really look forward to seeing over the next 5 years reporting on those indicators. One thing that was missing were indications of direction on indicators. So I think it's sort of obvious that you want crime to go down, but it never sort of says that in the plan. Now that's an obvious example. There are other ones where it's a little less obvious. I think you just might think about the indicators as being, the unit, but also suggest the direction. You're pushing to make a significant difference in crime, in traffic and accidents, in speeding, whatever it might be. Walking and biking, everyone appreciated the focus on talking about both sidewalks, sidewalk access, pedestrian accessibility, handicap accessibility, and also bicycle accessibility. But at least 4 of the priority projects listed were not really projects, but they were planning activities. So it talked about identifying funding, prioritizing improvements, performing studies, and developing mechanisms to fund, but not actually about making it better. So we'd urge you to identify some things, some projects some successes that could be achieved in the next 5 years that would actually make those things better. Climate change. It's been almost 2 years since the mayor signed the Conference of Mayors Climate Agreement, which was an agreement that set a goal to reduce the city's overall greenhouse gas emissions to 7% below 1990 levels. Prior to this, the local greenhouse gas action plan set a goal of 20% reduction. So we've already had 2 commitments to goals to climate change. We would urge you to act now, to set goals now for starting to make reductions, rather than charging the Committee on the Environment to make steps. I think our recommendation is that you engage staff and really think about some hard choices to try to make what the city's doing better in the future. There are more comments on here, which I'll just let you read through yourselves, but I appreciate the opportunity to comment on behalf of myself, Karen Anderson, David Korn, Sally Bond, Marcel Fozard, Christian Leike, Stephen Kern, Bruce Sidwell, Susan Harris, and Guinevere Roberts.
Thanks very much for your comments, and we look forward to seeing the document. Sure. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment? Up from up here.
Good evening. I read your document maybe a little too rapidly.
Can you give us your name and...
Jerome Ernst, Tacoma Avenue. And I found it very interesting and a serious endeavor. And I came tonight to hear the many comments. And so I could listen to that and then collect my thoughts. And since there are not too many. Is there a way of communicating effectively in writing? And is it read?
Yes. Yes. So if you'd like to submit comments.
To whom?
To you?
To you?
Oh. Probably the easiest thing is we've set up a email address that goes to the whole council, and if you want to use that, or do you want to use the putting it to the clerk so that it's part of the public hearing record? Yeah, I think that's probably better.
Oh, what did you say?
So
That's clerk@tacomagov.org. That's a special email address for public comments.
Thank you very much.
and we look forward to your comments as well. Anybody else who'd like to comment?
Oh, I had a question on
Yes.
what will be the cutoff for public comments? 1 week?
Let's give it 2.
Okay.
Okay, seeing no further comment, I close the public hearing, but as we just said, we will hold the public record open for 2 weeks for any further comments if anybody would like to submit any. The next item on our agenda is a presentation from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and we have Dave Robertson, the Executive Director, here with us. And make any comments you want from there, and whenever you get to the PowerPoint presentation, then we'll come down and sit in the audience.
Well, if the mayor and council would like, what might be easiest, I can make sure you get either electronic or hard copies, but in the interest of not shifting all of you around this evening.
We're used to it.
Okay, well then.
And we hope in the near future to do some revisions to this room where that won't be necessary.
If whatever is your pleasure. Let me just begin just with a quick introduction, and then if you'd like to relocate, we can do that. Again, I'm Dave Robertson, Executive Director of Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, COG. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this evening. I don't sort of do this necessarily on a cycle, but this seems to be the cycle. I'm doing more of these. Was in the District of Columbia a week or two ago, Alexandria last week, and Tacoma Park this evening, and we'll probably hit a few more in the next couple of weeks. And it's really an opportunity to look back at some areas of achievement or focus for the organization in the last year or so, as well as might be some areas of focus or attention for the next year or so. And so that's really the purpose. I'll try and keep my remarks fairly short, and then open up an opportunity for comment and dialogue. But I always try and begin these with just a little refresher for those that might be in the audience this evening, or folks that might be watching from their home in Tacoma Park. a little bit of a reminder of what is the Council of Governments. It's not intuitive that everybody knows what a regional council of governments is, but essentially we're the association of 21 local governments in the National Capital Region, a force of perhaps more than 250 strong local, state, and federal elected officials. So it's the mayor and the council of Tacoma Park, your counterparts from those other 21 local governments in suburban Maryland, Northern Virginia, and the District of Columbia, your representatives in the state legislature and those of your neighboring jurisdictions in suburban Maryland, their counterparts in Northern Virginia, and the region's congressional delegation. So it's your members of Congress as well as your 2 United States senators. And that adds up to be about 250 or 270 or so between that elected officials that are the members of COG. But we are largely governed by our board of directors and 2 independent policy boards, our National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, that is the federally recognized Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. Essentially, it's the group responsible for developing the region's constrained long-range plan and TIP. That's more acronyms, so we do a lot of those at COG, but it essentially means if there's major transportation investments, that's where that has to be the decision. Again, pretty significant role. The other major role that we have is to be the Tri-State Air Quality Planning Group, another role that we took on beginning in the early 90s. Essentially, we are the entity that is responsible, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, by action of the mayor and the 2 governors, to be responsible for developing the region's air quality plan, its conformity or alignment with our transportation plans. And again, that's a fairly significant role or function at COG. And then supporting all of that, we have a number of, a lot of committees. Your chiefs on our police chiefs committee, a number of you are on different policy advisory committees, human services and public safety, growth and development, Chesapeake Bay, aviation. But suffice it, if it's important to local governments, it's probably important to COG. So the issues that your chief was talking about in terms of traffic safety, that's something that's important to us. Some of the audience or the residents of your community talked about things, climate change and some other issues. That's important to us. So there are probably a few things that the city of Tacoma Park does that we don't get engaged in heavily, but those are probably the exception rather than the rule. So that's just a real quick overview, and again, time permitting, if you want to flip down and we can sort of figure out how to work the mechanics of the slides, we can go through at this time.
Okay, good.
Dim the lights. Great. Excellent. The graphic there on the screen pretty much tells you both the content of what I plan to say and then a little bit about where you fit in the great scheme of things. This is really about short-term needs, long-term goals. What are we doing now to help? What do we need to do in the future? And as you know, all of our local governments are important. We have very big communities such as Fairfax County, 1 million plus, smaller communities like Tacoma Park. But I think our association works very hard to make sure that we provide a forum for a strong and powerful voice for all of our jurisdictions, large and small. If you click over to the next slide, thank you. What we're going to talk a little bit about this evening, again, are sort of some short-term agendas and actions that we've been taking place and sort of our longer-term program coming up in the next fiscal year. Again, I like to think that we provide good return on investment to our member governments, taking some very timely issues such as foreclosure, pedestrian safety, long-range challenges, climate, and the Greater Washington 2050 that we'll talk a little bit about. But I also understand that in order to do that, it takes resources, takes a little bit of money. We thank you for that. But really the more important resource that we get from your community is your time and involvement. I sometimes save this for the end, but I'll say it at the beginning. We're a great organization. We've got good staff, but as effective as I think the organization is and as great as the staff may be, Without the engagement of our member officials and your staffs, we would not be able to do one fraction of the work that we do. If you click on to the next slide, thanks. One of the things that we've taken in the last year or so is really looking at sort of community planning and safety issues, and those are oftentimes the ones that hit home the most. I suspect they're the issues that come before this council on a regular basis. We've been struggling in our region with the issue of foreclosure, and I was really proud that this past year that we launched a major initiative around that. The good news is not all of our communities are especially hard hit, but some are terribly hard hit. Prince George's County and Prince William County the most, but by no means limited to those two communities. We sponsored a very successful conference, did essentially a new data report to sort of forecast where the problem is now and where the problem might be in the next few years. Struck by the fact, and you've probably seen some of this data yourself, that the first wave of foreclosures often was grounded in subprime, risky mortgages, problems, underwriting problems. But what we're seeing is sort of a second and potentially third wave in a lot of our communities. Frankly, it's just people that don't have the money now to pay their mortgage. So you see the wave of unemployment-generated foreclosures. How can we work together to provide good information to homeowners? The other thing is renters. A lot of renters are finding it difficult to make rent payments. Heard some conversation in your citizen comment about seniors and some low-income housing perhaps. That might be a challenge for a lot of our folks. We're also looking at, while we deal with urgent crises like foreclosure, we're looking at the long term. We know it's a viable, very robust region, but we want to make sure that the same qualities of life that caused folks to move to the city of Tacoma Park are going to be there for 2050. So we're particularly proud, and this was launched following our 50th anniversary. What are the sort of big issues that we need to be grappling with to look at what the quality of life might be in the year 2050? What are the big issues of climate change, job shifts, technology, and so forth? And we're going to be releasing some survey data. We're in the process of trying to hammer out a compact that might bind all of our member governments to some common principles and then put in place some metrics. How would we measure if we're moving towards those principles, not unlike the conversation you had around your strategic plan. And certainly emergency preparedness has been critical to COG. Law enforcement has been central to us pretty much since our founding, but post 9/11, emergency preparedness has been a major initiative for us, and very particularly proud. One achievement in the past couple months is the work we did around the preparation for the inauguration. If you were caught in the purple tunnel of doom, I'm sorry. That wasn't our responsibility, but I can tell you one thing. We had for probably 10 weeks leading up to the inaugural weekly conference calls of city managers, police chiefs, federal officials, state officials, all working with one purpose to make sure that this was a safe and effective inaugural event. And I think on a lot of measures we met those goals. Next slide, please. As I said, we're looking at some long-term issues, particularly in environmental areas. Climate change, we launched a couple of years ago, again, associated a bit with our 50th anniversary, a task force examining climate change. Very proud that we are one of the first regional associations of government in the country to have adopted a multi-year commitment to reducing CO2 reductions, and pleased that that's really at the heart of your strategic plan as well. We've got some fairly short deliverables coming up as early as our 2012 targets. We think those are going to be achievable, but then after that it gets hard. It gets harder as we go out 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050. I did mention that we are the region's Air Quality Planning Board. We've gotten good progress in that regard. We've been working very aggressively to meet the new federal standards, always tightening and making it a bit harder, but ultimately more helpful for our residents in the region. The Air Quality Committee released a new plan on fine particulates, essentially soot in the air, tiny particles that get in lungs and the bloodstream, and how we can minimize that. That has increased in recent years. We're also, and I know this is one of the areas you asked to talk about, and so I'll touch on this a little more, but the possible redesignation of the air quality planning area for our region, sort of merging the National Capital Region with Baltimore, and why we don't think that's a particularly good idea. And also Anacostia restoration has been an important priority for us. Cleanup of the Anacostia, which leads to cleanup of the Potomac, which leads to cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay, It really is starts small and gets much larger. Everything from trash, we've been part of the Alice Ferguson Foundation Trash-Free Potomac Treaty, and that's been pretty helpful as well. Next slide, quickly, thanks. Transportation, it's hard to sort of say what's job one at COG, but transportation is about as close as it can get to job one. We've had outstanding leadership from this community on a number of transportation issues. It's everything from making sure that we have a smart transportation plan that recognizes the notions of transit-oriented development, greater opportunities for pedestrian mobility, safety and security of our transportation resources. Last couple of years, we've launched programs around job access, reverse commute, essentially how can we squeeze more bang out of a very limited transportation infrastructure system, and the New Freedom Program, which provides greater accessibility for persons with disabilities, funding things like accessible taxi cabs to make sure that they're out there. Commuter connections, gas has come down a bit, but when it was knocking around $4 and plus, we saw a tremendous increase in interest in our commuter connections programs, everything from ride-sharing programs to guaranteed ride home program. Applications shot up over 184%. We're continuing to ride that wave a bit still, even though gas has come down. We think a lot of those folks that subscribe to some of those programs continue to be advocates and participants in that. And then pedestrian safety is another area. We are part of the Street Smart Pedestrian Safety Campaign, Smooth Operator, Aggressive Driving Program, and work on a lot of initiatives, again, very similar to the comments that I heard a moment ago from your chief. Next slide. We're also trying to do a couple of things, both internal and external, because I think you have to lead by example. We're also greening the Council of Governments. We have a green roof. It's small, but I'm told that if the green roof could survive the winter, and I've been told it has, we're going to be able to expand our planting area up there. We've adopted a number of energy-efficient initiatives at COG, everything from improved HVAC in our computer room, which heats up a lot. We've also done some small things like having greater recycle containers and so forth throughout COG, and some greater use of environmentally sensitive materials, everything from utensils and such for some of our meetings that are biodegradable. So again, I think that's part to lead by example. We're also trying to take our message on both policy and our internal achievements on the road. We had some very successful events in Annapolis and Richmond this past month or so. Appreciate Mayor Williams participating in that. We're really taking that message out on the road pretty aggressively on Capitol Hill with state legislators. Next slide, you can kind of click through one more after this. But again, all of that takes dollars. I like to think that we're pretty good stewards of resources, but we know that these are tough times. You have to make choices on how you spend both your time and dollars. Our work program, looking forward, beginning July 1, builds on the successes of the past. A small number of high priority goals. Many are continuing goals. I'd like to think that a lot of our work can be done quickly, but things like Metro dedicated funding, which was launched some 4 years ago, we're still pushing that very hard, and I'll give you an update on that as well. We also like to think we're part of value-added services, everything from our cooperative purchasing program to our IRE program, Institute for Regional Excellence program, and our Regional Healthcare Coalition. Very few new initiatives in this proposed work program and budget, and a number of reductions and eliminations of programs and committees to try and get a more effective, streamlined program at COG. Next slide real quick. This provides the macro issue of our approximately $26 million budget. We get dues from our member governments totaling about $3.2 million. We have staff recommended, the committee agreed, and the board approved. Membership assessed, no increase in membership assessment. So the City of Tacoma Park will not pay 1 penny more in fiscal year 2010 than you did in fiscal year 2009. We know even at that is going to be hard. There are a number of activities in your work program and budget that will see net reductions. I know that because I work with your manager and the other managers throughout the region. But if you click to the next slide, I like to think we provide a good return on investment. Our dues constitute a little less than 12% of our entire agency-wide budget. The rest of that is federal, state grants and contracts, a lot of entrepreneurial stuff. I noted in your lobby as I came in The display for the Wednesday's Child program, that is 100% funded by a grant from the Freddie Mac Foundation, and we get about 15% of our budget from what I would call truly entrepreneurial efforts, essentially knocking on doors, developing grant applications, and hustling up money on behalf of the priorities that you've set. Next slide. And a little bit about, and I know this is, I had laser eye surgery, but it's even hard for me sometimes to see, but this is sort of where our money comes from. You can see the biggest pie is federal money, then state, and then local funds, and then the entrepreneurial or special funds. Really not much of a change between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 10. Next slide, where does that money go? Most of that is in the area of transportation planning. Again, it's hard to pick job one because we do a lot of important things, but if you sometimes think about our program like you do the federal government of entitlement things and discretionary things, transportation is pretty close to an entitlement function, that we kind of have to do that. That's probably the same with our air quality issues. The rest of that is because you and your colleagues decide it's important. Public safety and Homeland Security. We get most of our money in that from federal grants around Homeland Security, but you've said it's important. Mayor Williams represents your community and many others on our Emergency Preparedness Council. So it's things like affordable housing, it's things like foster care, it's things like public health issues that you say are important. But that's a little bit where the money goes. Next slide, real quick. Ups and downs in our budget, just like there are ups and downs in your budget. If you see any ups, it's only because we're more aggressive and successful and we project greater opportunities for grants. But there are some pluses and then some minuses in those areas. And I'll answer any questions a little later if you have that. Next slide. What we're doing to sort of tighten our own belt, we're doing the same things you're doing, hopefully equally successfully. We will go from 139 authorized FTEs in the current fiscal year down to about 130 in fiscal year 2010. Most of that will be through attrition, but some of that has already been in the form of reductions and reorganizations. Travel restrictions, again, no rocket science here, going less places and making most of those that go. Meeting cost reductions for an organization that's all about meetings. Oddly enough, that's where we can achieve some real economies. Hope we haven't put out anything less than a very vigorous welcome mat to our member governments and others participate, but we've tried to cut back there. As I said, reduce staffing. And we've been actually pretty effective in reorganizing and sort of making COG a little leaner and meaner as an organization. Last couple of slides, and then next slide, and then I'll wrap it up for questions. Again, sort of what we're doing going forward. I think Greater Washington 2050 has amazing promise for our region. I've been really pleased with the interest and engagement that we've had on that. Sharon Bulova, who just recently elected chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, has chaired that, done an amazing job. A lot of engagement of our member officials, business leaders, civic leaders, environmental leaders, Coalition for Smarter Growth, you name it. We've got about 50 or so people that are part of that, essentially crafting what might be a compact, aspirational goals that we could all agree on across boundaries, what might be principles that are embodied in those compact developments, what might be some metrics or measures that we could use to monitor progress. COG is a voluntary association, so we can't compel Tacoma Park to do A or Montgomery County B necessarily, but I believe that if we work together as a region, there's a lot that we can achieve. Touched on Metro dedicated funding. I wish that was moving faster. The good news is after much effort, Congress passed the authorization legislation. Now we're working with the states to develop compact amendment legislation. The tricky part about WMATA compact amendments is it has to be identical language in D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and then Congress has to pass it too. So you can imagine the struggle that may pose, but we're working on that right now. And then to deal with appropriations. Want to make sure that we actually get the money that's authorized in the federal legislation. Climate change, touched on that briefly. Again, I think that holds great promise for the region and for COG. I think some of the housing issues, at the same time that we struggle with foreclosure issues, it's still a pretty expensive place to live in this region, and we've got to make sure that our families have safe and quality affordable housing regardless of income or jurisdiction. We're working with a lot of our folks in preparation for the 2010 census. For an organization that's about planning, we've got to have good numbers, and we've got to make sure that every resident of Tacoma Park and all of our communities are counted accurately and quickly and fairly. 2 new initiatives. I said there wasn't much in the way of new initiatives, but there are 2. One is on regional workforce competitiveness. Board launched a task force on that. I think it's very well timed. That's pretty simple in concept, probably difficult in execution, but what are the jobs we think that we're going to get? Where's the growth and development opportunities for our region and its workforce? How can we better leverage the existing workforce education and training systems, everything from K-12, community college, higher education, lifelong learning and retraining is going to be very important. We're in the process of assembling that task force, should be appointed this month. And then economic sustainability and recovery. Appreciated your Deputy Manager's comments about that. I would agree wholeheartedly with her comment that it's sort of a big moving train with a lot of interest in it, but not sure where the train's going to end up entirely. But our board has asked us also to track some of the economic sustainability and recovery efforts, both to provide best practices or good information to our member governments to try and help everybody wade through the thicket of regulations and information. Also to try and identify if there's 2 or 3 priorities that we may be able to embrace as a region. Certainly, while a lot of the transportation improvements that are going to come through the TPB are maintenance and rehabilitation, they will generate jobs and they will help meet some of our short-term needs. Heard the Deputy Manager's comment about the poor quality of New Hampshire Avenue. Don't know whether that'll be one of your priorities for stimulus funding, but certainly there are a lot of transportation priorities out there that can be maintenance and rehab, still generate jobs, and be very helpful. We're also, frankly, looking at if there's some economies of scale around some of the weatherization and home energy audits. If we can do that, perhaps at the regional scale, there's been some discussion at COG about that. And then issues around affordable housing and homelessness, there's some discretionary programs available for that. Last slide really is, I'm going to touch quickly on a couple things that you've asked about. Jobs, housing balance. That's really been at the heart of a lot of COG's work, sometimes called sort of east-west divide and a number of things, but how can we make sure that our opportunities are available in terms of transportation and mobility and jobs throughout the region. The east-west divide really is at the core of a lot of the work that we do in terms of our analysis, and is part of the analysis we're doing at TPB with some of our alternative transportation and growth scenarios. In terms of, you also asked about fair share and affordable housing. One of the things that we're going to be bringing forward to the board later this year, it's not quite the notion of fair share, although that when we had a more vigorous partner in HUD, that worked better. When HUD really moved away from project-based subsidies to tenant-based subsidies, it got harder to implement a fair share affordable housing plan. But one of the things we are looking at is developing housing production and preservation targets throughout the region. One of the issues that often comes up from your community, Prince George's, Montgomery County, this part of the region, is that other jurisdictions haven't quite done their fair share in developing low and moderate income housing, which exacerbates the sort of flow of people from the east to the west for jobs and then back for the more affordable housing. That's, I think, going to be an area of focus for us this coming year. Touched on also the notion of the redesignation of the area, the sort of the merger perhaps of the Baltimore and Washington regions. We don't think that makes sense. The COG board, MWAC, and all of our partners have made that point clear. It's really unclear what the objective that EPA is trying to achieve by that, but we are being very aggressive to beat that back, and I think we're going to have some success. You also asked about measuring greenhouse gas emissions, as that will certainly be part of our climate change effort. The good news is the same capacity that we have in place to measure fine particulates or ozone that's part of our air quality planning requirements or responsibilities will lend itself very nicely to measuring CO2 reductions in our region and how we can really meet that 2012 and those out years. And last, again, tied back perhaps to your strategic plan, we also have a strategic plan. Mayor Williams was instrumental a few years ago in hammering that out. We appreciate that very much. We also try and integrate our plan with what we do. So when we take initiatives to the COG board, like the initiatives around workforce, like the initiatives in climate change, we measure or we assess whether or not those are consistent with our strategic plan goals. The good news is just about everything that we're doing is lining up fairly nicely. There are some areas that continue to be harder for us to crack. Some of our goals around human services are continuing to be difficult. We're an organization not unlike your community. We can do things quicker or bigger or faster if we have more resources, and unfortunately in the last few years, human services funding from the federal government for things like HIV/AIDS and child care and foster care and a number of those issues have been harder to come by. We're probably doing the same thing you're doing, which is trying to position the region and your community for some of those new resources. And last but not least, I said I usually end on this, but I touched on it at the beginning, we're all about leadership. We could not do what we do without the support of the mayor and the council. Just about all of you are active in one venue or forum or another. Your staff are very active in the work of our organization, really provides a force multiplier to achieve what we do. So in the interest of time, let me stop there and be happy to take any questions from the mayor and council. Thank you for moving.
You had a slide up on revenues earlier.
Yes.
So ways back.
Okay.
Going.
That one.
No,
The one before.
One before.
Yes.
You have state 2.9 in 2009 and 4.3 in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Sure. We're getting, and I hope we continue to get it, it's projected. We've gotten some additional resources for some of our environmental work, particularly some of the air quality areas and a few others. So we are getting some more resources for that. We've also been getting some additional transportation funding. Again, COG, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but particularly a lot of our transportation planning programs are 80-10-10, 80% federal, 10% state, 10% local. So in some of our areas, if the federal's bumping up, we've got matching funds from the state. So far, so good. We've been able to see that. We're monitoring our revenue monthly is not often enough to make sure that those funding commitments, we're very, and this came in our budget meeting, we're very cautious about states, and they're probably going to do it to the localities, you know, the trickle down of where the resources end up, and so we're concerned about some of the state resources. But we've been very fortunate at having very strong federal and state partners, and so we expect to get some additional resources in some of those areas.
Because it's quite noticeable.
Yes, it is. That's a good point. So sorry to make the move.
We all get practice at moving around. One thing that I'd like you to follow up on just a little bit is the climate change area, and in particular greenhouse gas reduction targets and measurements. I think one of the things that we've found most difficult about trying to measure areas that we can target reductions is the fact that we're so small relative to the region, and there are particular things with energy in buildings, that kind of stuff, where we can get some fairly good measurements. But on the big piece, which tends to be transportation, it's just about impossible for us to get any breakout of numbers down to our level. So I'm wondering to what extent the regional effort and the renewed effort of the climate change initiative is going to enable us to get any kind of sense of what's going on a more local level, even if it's just to the extent of claiming some of the bigger number for our proportion, and if there's any sense of trying to break down the regional effort to give some more local sense of anything that we might be doing that would help that regional effort?
No, it's certainly a challenge. It's a challenge for larger, I mean, it's not limited to your community, even some of the larger counties, and even major companies and so forth are just having difficulty quantifying that. I think I'll answer sort of the short piece and then maybe touch on the bigger piece. The short piece is I think that will be an area where we can provide some technical assistance or support to our member jurisdictions to help folks measure and be able to quantify it. It's difficult to convince residents of your community to take what are sometimes either inconvenient or difficult steps if there's not a sense that it's going to have some impact or benefit. So the ability to measure and show that as a result of these actions, it's having these sort of outputs or outcomes, I think, is going to be important. So that will be one area where I think we're going to, frankly, have to work with our local governments to help to provide the tools and the strategies to measure. You're right. The good news is for a lot of the things that you can do, either as a homeowner or as a community, are pretty measurable. Examples, I did what I think a lot of folks have done, I suspect, which is to change out light bulbs and some other things that you can do. And I've seen a measurable decrease in my electric bill. And so that's a good thing, even with the higher costs that we're starting to see in a lot of our communities, complain about higher gas costs or electric costs. So a lot of the measures that we can do can have short-term measurable reductions and have pretty quick paybacks in terms of lighting and heating the systems and so forth. But you're also right that the really big bang for the buck is often around transportation issues, and the work that your community has done in terms of transit-oriented development is going to pay those types of dividends, and we're going to see reduced vehicle miles traveled. We can count that, and so those are the types we can see the reduction in single occupancy vehicles. We can count that, and we can then extrapolate those measures to reductions in CO2. So I think we'll be able to sort of do a 1-2 punch. One punch is the smaller things, and then the other punch is going to be the larger things. But that's probably going to be an area where we're going to have to provide some support to our member governments, large and small. It is it's not a firm science yet, because I think everybody's grappling with the same issues throughout the country and the globe, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I know that one thing that we've kind of joked about for a long time that shows the effect of what happens regionally affecting any efforts we make here is we kind of talk about we're a community of the commuted upon. And any efforts that we make to reduce our use of, to reduce vehicle miles traveled may be dwarfed by whatever else is going on as people come through us, which only causes us to redouble our efforts to try and make sure that we're a transit-oriented community.
Well, example of that, just from the other side of the river, Sean Connaughton, former chairman of the Prince William County Board, commented to me one time in this same type of a context or presentation that, the bigger challenge for his community is the traffic coming south from 95 through his community. And so, no matter what he does to address his community's needs, he's still going to have that sort of through traffic that has to be done at the larger scale. So I think there's some lesson there that the more we work on this regionally, probably the more effective we're going to be.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Wright?
Just to clarify, will COG be able to provide to a place like Tacoma Park a measure of our greenhouse gas emissions? Because that's one of the things we are definitely struggling with. Just, I think, the last time the Committee on the Environment tried to put it together, there's just a ton of work in not only the cars, but just getting information from Pepco, for example, about what the electricity usage is in our city is near impossible. But I think Council of Government probably has, with all of its jurisdictions, would have more power to get Pepco to actually furnish that.
Well, that's a hard, the business of the power companies, it has been fairly difficult. They've not been the most readily cooperative partners in this, not out of perhaps intent, but a lot of it's proprietary information and so forth. They get fairly cautious about that. The short answer is yes, but there's a but, and the short answer is yes. I believe we can work with you to sort of model that. Again, it's not going to be some of the work that we may do, particularly like ozone. We actually have ozone monitors that we can count and monitor that. Particularly, a lot of the CO2 will be through modeling, not unlike the modeling that we do in our transportation planning program, but I think we'll be able to hit close to the mark. I think there will be some scale issues of things that are more easily modeled or inputs and things that are just going to be, quite frankly, to drill down at that. And even a large jurisdiction, I think, is going to be hard on some issues. But the short answer is yes. I believe we will be able to assist our member governments in modeling their impact of and effectiveness in this area. So again, that you can build that support within your community for the tough, sometimes tough, a lot of easy ones, but sometimes tough decisions that are going to have to be made.
Thanks. And then the second thing has to do with affordable housing. I'm encouraged to hear that we're starting to have the discussion about setting a standard for communities. And I'm on the development planning board, and they came to talk about that. The one thing I was sort of a little disappointed, I mean, I think it's good that we're taking the first step, but I was a little disappointed in was that the measure that they're looking at, their target is really around 80% of median income.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a percentage of, what number of units are 80% of median income. And I just think we need to look beyond that raw measure, and actually, particularly in this region, because the income level, median income level is really high, we need to have also a goal for 60 and 30% of median income. Because just doing the 80 is going to leave a lot of people who are in service jobs and workforce housing kind of out of the picture.
No, I'll follow up on that. The reason for the 80 is, I suspect all of you know, I mean, those are fairly common, and there's sort of federal benchmarks that you can sort of go, and it ties back to a lot of the federal programs. But I think you're right. In a high-cost area such as the National Capital Region, with a lot of high incomes, you're going to lose a lot of people in the mix. So
the 60 and 30, Colleen may know this better than I do. I think the 60 and 30 are also part of the targets associated with federal programs. So.
Yeah, they have ones. 80% is a big marker, but they have ones that are built much lower.
yeah, we can look at that.
And I think that historically the hardest place to find subsidies has been in the lower ranges, particularly for people who are homeless. We have 100% subsidy. But also when people build them, they have the hardest time getting people to qualify and get into them as well in many places. It's a funny...
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been just profoundly difficult for state and localities to provide the level of the deep subsidies that are necessary for the folks that are really, really low income. It's just been a struggle, particularly as things have shifted from project-based to tenant-based. It's just hard. But again, I think there's a lot of opportunities working with the new administration in HUD to sort of re-examine that issue. And I think we started to have some dialogue with HUD officials to see whether or not what we're doing is they're interested in what we're doing, and they might want to view it as a pilot or a demo of some of the things that we used to do a long time ago, but we sort of have fallen out of favor.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for coming to visit us tonight.
Well, you come to my house a lot. I can at least go to yours every now and then.
I know in the past, Council of Governments has partnered with the Alice Ferguson Foundation, and I think it's been very beneficial, the anti-litter campaign and kind of the impact on the waterways. And I wonder if that's something with the economic cuts that you're still able to continue.
Yes, we are very much continuing that partnership. The good news is the Alice Ferguson Foundation, it has to hustle up dollars for its activities as well, but we are very much a viable partner with that program, and will continue. And I appreciate you, as maybe a year or so ago, I can't remember was, but did the Trash Free Potomac press conference, kind of muddy occasion.
Drizzly day, yeah.
But it underscored the
Is that campaign going on again this year?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Do you know if we're participating in that again this year?
Yeah, I can get information to your manager.
I hope that we are, and if not, we should.
And the good news is, I think there's potentially with some of the focus on environmental sustainability and other issues from the administration, I think there's going to be some opportunities for some new partnerships and relationships that maybe we haven't had in the past. So I'm hoping to see that even more strengthened if we can.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? I wondered if you had any thoughts about your sense of where things might potentially go in the region with efforts like District of Columbia Councilmember Tommy Wells' initiative in the district about bags, paper bags
yes.
and plastic bags. And I know that there's the same bill is filed in Annapolis by Delegate Carr, and there's been talk in Tacoma Park about, gee, we should ban plastic bags, or, you know, various things that we could do. And I've thought that for it to be really effective as a small jurisdiction, it's hard for us to say, okay, you know, to the couple of stores here, okay, you can't use these, and it's like, well, you're putting it as a complete competitive disadvantage with everybody else around, why pick on us? But as part of a broader regional initiative, it should be fairly easy to support that and do some education on it. And I wondered if you have a sense of where that might be going, or how that might tie in with any regional effort.
No, a great question, and luckily have, I think, a pretty decent answer for that. Good news is we are tracking that and working. We've met with, it's Councilmember Graham in the District of Columbia that introduced the legislation in the Council of the District of Columbia. Met with discussion with the Maryland legislators that are supporting this. Virginia Delegate Adam Evan from Alexandria introduced legislation. It didn't go very far in the Virginia General Assembly this year, but we're actually, through our recycling committee, I believe it's Thursday of this week, we're bringing together the advocates for this at the state legislative level, and Tommy Wells has been very active and aggressive on this. So we're bringing together the district folks, the Maryland folks, and some Virginia folks, and frankly representatives of the industries that will be most affected, the sort of the Safeways, the retailers, the CVSs, and so forth. Because I think we've got to have an honest dialogue of where the opportunities are and where the challenges are. So essentially fact-finding is not the right term, but essentially an opportunity to sort of hear what are the issues, the pros and the cons, I think is going to be aired out this week at the Council of Governments. There's some discussion about taking this then to the Chesapeake Bay Committee. Certainly it could fall in any number of...
Which is Friday of this week.
Right. It could fall any number of places. So there'll be a discussion at that committee because a lot of these bags do wind up in the waterways and contribute to pollution and harming aquatic wildlife and so forth. So, you know, I don't know whether it's on a fast track or maybe a slower track, but I do suspect this will be engaged at the COG Board of Directors sometime this year, at least for a briefing or information. In the case of Virginia, the window for some type of action has passed, but I know in the district, Wells and others are supporting this. In Maryland, it's still a ball in play for your General Assembly session. So short answer is yes, we are tracking and engaging that, and I think to your point, you know, it would probably be a difficult, from a marketing or economic perspective, to have even larger communities do this, you know, because Safeway, no doubt, has the same wholesale people that distribute bags and so forth throughout the region, and to do for one different than they do for another would put them at added cost, which really exacerbates the problem you're trying to address. So short answer is yes, we're taking it up, and you'll hear more starting this week.
Good, because I think we here would like to do whatever we can to get behind any effort like that to make sure that it is a regional effort.
Yep.
Councilmember Snipper.
Yes, just to follow up on this, I have a neighbor across the street who's an organic farmer, and he does a lot of farmers markets, and he has discovered that there are replacement for plastic bags that are biodegradable, compostable materials. They actually don't cost significantly more than regular plastic bags when you buy them in the sort of 10,000 bags kind of thing that you want under these circumstances. And when he went to his local supplier, to ask about why the local supplier didn't have them, the guy said, we just never get any requests for them. So I suspect with a little leadership...
Create a market, yeah.
Yeah, I think a little leadership at the regional level to get this information out, find out who the suppliers are. As you were indicating earlier, you've got to get Safeway and Giant and these kind of large purchasers on board with it, and then the suppliers would be able to do it. And I think I think that would be a terrific solution to it.
Well, I'll follow up with you and try and get the name of that individual. And one other thing that we've thought about a little bit is whether or not there might be an opportunity for by partnering with some private sector firms, giving away a lot of the sort of permanent totes type of a thing. If you buy them at Whole Foods or Safeway or Giant Meat and buy those now. The good news is you can buy them just about everywhere. Bad news is they're still a little pricey, particularly for folks that are low income that have to buy 5 or 6, to feed a large family. It gets kind of cost prohibitive, but my guess is that we might be able to drive down some of those costs. Partnership example is for a number of years we partnered with Handy Company, the folks that own Radio Shack, to give smoke detector giveaway programs for low income families. And, so there's a lot of ways to sort of tackle this problem.
I want to thank you very much for
My
coming
pleasure.
and sharing what's going on at COG and getting our questions and providing the update. And I just want to thank you in particular for your efforts over, I don't know how long it's
That's
been,
a long
but
time.
it's, I'll say, what, 25 years at COG?
Not quite, but I might look at it that way, but not quite.
And
Oh, well.
the great job that you've done as executive director, and we really appreciate it, and look forward to continued partnership with COG and continued enjoyment of working with our regional partners.
Great. It's a great organization, and thank you for your support. Thank you for the rest of your evening.
And we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back for our 2 special session items in our work session.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Awarding a contract for environmental assessment of Sligo Mill and Poplar Mill. Would Councilmember Robinson like to introduce that? And somebody like to second it? Okay, seconded by Councilmember Wright. This is the item that we discussed, I think it was last week, to get the assessment so that we can have our maintenance plan going forward for those properties. And the Public Works Director is here. Was there any comments you want to make? Okay, any council questions or comments? Any public comments or questions? Seeing none, this is a single reading ordinance. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Barry.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. The next item is another single reading ordinance, this one awarding a contract for replacement of stormwater outfall behind 519 New York Avenue. Again, we went over this one last week. This is for work on, it's on private property, but it's a city, it's a city facility. And I see that you provided us with kind of a map on where it is. And so would somebody like to introduce this? Moved by Councilmember Wright, seconded by Councilmember Barry. Is there any council question or discussion? Any public comment on this single reading ordinance? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
Aye.
Councilmember Barry.
Aye.
Councilmember Clay.
Aye.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Councilmember Stevens.
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper.
Aye.
Councilmember Wright.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. We have a couple people here from the Nuclear Free Tacoma Park Committee, and I think maybe I'd like to move that item forward. And okay. And so if you want to give your report, and then following that, we'll do the legislative update. Welcome. if you want to introduce yourselves and tell us what we need to know.
Great. Well, maybe we'll start with introductions, and then we'll each make a very brief presentation, and then we're looking forward to your comments and questions.
I'm Linda Gunter.
I'm Bob Rini.
Julie Bodie.
Thank you for all your hard work. Appreciate you being here late at night like we all are today. It really shows our government working. Thank you. We're here from the Nuclear Free Tacoma Park Committee to give our annual report. We've been very busy over the last year. Mostly we've done a number of activities I think would be of interest. We have continued our efforts to monitor the court case in the United States District Court involving the transportation of hazardous chemicals through the district, and as should be no surprise to many of the council members, it continues to remain pending and subject to a tug of war over federal preemption and state rights issues. But we will keep a close eye on that because of its precedential value in connection with the possible transportation of nuclear waste through the rails and over the highways that pass through and around Tacoma Park, Maryland, as is part of our mission here at the committee. Second, we've also begun pursuing an alternative to Nuclear Free America's list of companies that the city may do business with. Apparently, under the Bush administration, a good deal of information that used to be public about the nature of activities of companies who produce nuclear weapons or components was no longer public. So maintaining an updated list is a little bit more challenging than it had been historically. So we're working with that organization and trying to find some alternative ways to bring you an updated list for the city to rely upon in the future. So those efforts are underway. Third, we've also been exploring the option of bringing to the city a choice of being able to ask that it actually not purchase any nuclear generated power, if that's feasible. So we're in the early stages of exploring whether that's feasible. Finally, we've been and are planning on tabling at community events and other similar festivals and parades with information and pamphlets and our much in demand T-shirts for the nuclear free zone. So you'll see us being very active in reaching out to the community and promoting the work that we do and do with the city. And then finally, we are in the process of trying to recruit additional members to the committee, and also are hoping that we might be able to recruit a youth member to the committee who will be able to reach out to the middle and high school and promote the work of the committee that we do. So on that note, why don't I turn it over to my colleague Julie, and she'll give you a brief overview of some of the other aspects of what the committee's been working on.
On the lighter side, we are continuing to work with Art for People that gave us a poster for our, what do you call it, our message? Our message?
Logo?
No, when we met, we had nuclear free ice cream when we met at the
anniversary event.
At the anniversary, and they made a wonderful poster, and we're going to work with Tacoma Mosaic in that process and get our message up on the library wall along with the rest of this mosaic that appears to be really quite splendid and working. I wanted to mention also the international dimensions of what we do through Mayors for Peace, which is endorsed also by the International Congress of Mayors, and which has supplied us its logo. And it seems like such a very dynamic organization. I was looking at the web tonight. It gained 69 members in March of 2009 alone, and most of the cities of Italy are going to go over. But to get back to our point, I'd move it along to Linda.
Thanks, Julie.
I was just going to reiterate that one of the events that we did do, which some of you were here for, was the anniversary event, where we had some presentations and a short film and ice cream. And one of the things I've been working on is to try to restore the sign, the nuclear-free signs that were, some of them are up and some of them are not up, that used to be up, and then we identified, looking at the map of the boundaries of the city, some of the other places that potentially could have a sign, which are sort of major entrances to Tacoma Park. And I'm sorry that Daryl left, but I actually have emailed Public Works to try and find out whether there any signs are still there, and if so, what's involved in restoring them. There does seem to be a new one up suddenly. I'm not quite sure that happened on Eastern Avenue at the Piney Branch. Yeah, right next to the other one that's there on Piney Branch that goes in. So maybe that's just spontaneously underway. I don't know, but
We have been working on trying to restore the posting of the nuclear-free signs. And if there's a question about some, I'm happy to follow up. It is interesting that there's the two on Flower Avenue.
I think that what Daryl said is that they're out being made and that was taking a little longer.
Right, but we have recently installed several, so I'm happy to talk with you if there's a question about some of the locations. Please let me know.
Okay.
They look really good.
Yeah, because I think,
It's really cool to see them back up.
I think the one reappeared by Montgomery College on Philadelphia.
Right. So it may be moved. It's happening anyway. So, well, other than that, yeah, I mean, I think that's in one of the idea that Councilmember Wright encouraged us to pursue, which was to see if we could become truly nuclear-free, is a very significant step, because it would be somewhat groundbreaking in the context of the historic nuclear-free zone idea, and I think also very important in today's context, because when this idea first arrived, it was very much part of the Cold War era, when the greatest fear was about nuclear weapons and less concern was being given to what happens to nuclear materials that are generated by the civilian sector and how these can get out into the environment and into the wrong hands and so on. And it was obviously pre-9/11 and the whole environment's changed, and so there's a lot more consciousness and heightened awareness now, I think, about the nuclear power danger and how that leads to nuclear weapons, rather than the original sort of genesis of nuclear weapons then metamorphosing into nuclear power. So the whole thing has kind of reversed itself, and that's pretty apparent in the Middle East, particularly in Iran, where there's a lot of concern about whether Iran is really making, creating all these centrifuges in order to just have a civilian nuclear program, where in fact it's on a path to the bomb, and at least on an appearance of a path to the bomb, which could have the same kind of destabilizing effect. So we're sort of in the crux of a very important turning point in sort of international global things. There's a lot of debate in the circles that I'm in, at least, about this connection, and a certain degree of resistance from arms control groups to acknowledge the nuclear power connection. And it's made more complicated by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of which all the nuclear weapons states are signatories, but none of whom have actually complied by reducing and then abolishing their nuclear weapons. And there's a clause in that treaty that gives, quote-unquote, the inalienable right to any signatory that's not a weapon state to have civilian nuclear power. And that's what Iran has taken advantage of, and that is what 13 plus other Middle Eastern countries are prepared to take advantage of. So it's more important than ever to sort of broaden, I think, the scope of what we think of as nuclear-free to mean in the 21st century, because it doesn't really mean quite the same thing as it did when it was first created. So I'm excited by this project. I think it's going to be challenging from a cost point of view. We're very open to suggestions in terms of how we can sort of composite different energy efficiency and renewable energy sources into the whole to obviate the nuclear power component without increasing, obviously, the fossil fuel component, which is definitely essential. One of the people I can consult with, if he has the time, is Arjun Makajani, who has his institute here in Tacoma Park, the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, and has produced a book which is called Carbon Free and Nuclear Free, a roadmap for U.S. energy future, and actually shows how we can transition out of nuclear power and nuclear weapons completely by 2050 in this country by doing lots of very obvious and sensible things like solar roofs on parking lots and so on. So without belaboring it, I think that's probably one of the more unusual steps, and probably sets us apart a little bit from the traditional nuclear-free cities.
Except that it's also echoed in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. They have similar, at least green tendencies.
Yeah, but they haven't taken, I mean, the difficulty with the Conference of Mayors is they will not take a position opposing nuclear power. And actually, they deliberately avoid dealing with it. So it's, to them, a very separate thing. It's based in Hiroshima. You know, there's an obvious link there with the history of the bomb. So I think that's the only challenge. I mean, I don't want to debate it here, but you know, that is the challenge of the mayors, is that they won't take a position against nuclear energy publicly anyway.
I think we all often ask ourselves what it means to be nuclear free in Tacoma Park, and maybe we could use this opportunity not only hear ourselves talk, but hear a little bit from each of you about what it means to be nuclear free and what direction you would like to see our committee go forward with in the future, if you so inclined.
Councilmember Slipper, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. I have two things. One is, thank you, well, three things. One is I'd like to thank you for doing the report and all the work that you do. I enjoyed the anniversary event and the other stuff as well. Very interested in this issue, have been for a long time. I do note something that the committee, two things the committee could work on. One is that there was a story in the Washington Post recently that wind power is now cheaper than, through a little quirk in the way wholesale energy prices work, wind power is now cheaper than Pepco is charging. So there's really no excuse not to purchase wind power instead of renewable, let's call it, because some of it is solar, than either coal-fired or nuclear. The city, the council's been working on getting the city to move to renewable sources, and it was a budget issue because up until recently it was more expensive, and it may still be because of the way these long-term contracts and so on get worked out with the city. But I think the committee could work very hard to push hard on the issue that you were just talking about of one easy way not to purchase nuclear generated electricity is to just purchase renewable.
Right.
And that would just leap a couple of really cool fences. So that's one. There used to be an argument for, you had to pay a little more to get wind power. Now you don't. You actually save money. And the nice thing for the public, those people who are listening, is you can do a 2-year contract, so you can lock in the price. And Pepco continues to raise its prices, so that if you lock in a price now, you're going to save a little bit of money now, and it'll be more later. The second thing I think the committee could work on is tuning up the process a little bit for your advising the city on purchases. That's one of the main functions of the committee, and last year we had an unfortunate little part of the process in which the police department wanted to buy some new radios, and we did not really have the advice of the committee on whether there was an alternative or not. And we went ahead and purchased those radios, and I would hope that the committee in the next year can work more actively with the city manager to make sure that the sort of notification process occurs. The way the design of the process is that at budget time, that is when departments prepare their budgets with the city manager, they at that time know what things they're going to purchase, whether it's a new vehicle or whether it's radios or so on, because it has to be put in the budget. And that's the time the Nuclear Free Zone Committee is supposed to be notified that there may or may not be an issue. So that it shouldn't be that when like we had tonight, the first reading comes up and all of a sudden somebody has to make a decision. That's not when the Nuclear Free Zone Committee is supposed to be involved. It's supposed to be involved much earlier. And I urge you to talk to the city manager about making sure that process is working.
Well, if we can just make a comment, this is news to me that there was such a situation. So I don't think you're suggesting that the Nuclear Free Zone Committee should be embedded in the workings of the city government. on a
Not at all,
day-to-day
no.
basis to be able to spot these things. I think that the onus is on the city to contact us.
Yes, that's
They have our
correct.
emails and our phone numbers, and I know we're easily contacted. So you can count on us to give a prompt and fair review to all such requests. And to the extent there's a timeliness issue, as long as we're aware of it, we're certainly capable and have proven it to be able to meet as frequently and as often as we can. So we look forward to whatever outreach we need to make to the city, because we feel that's one of our core responsibilities. And we certainly don't want to hear about it on an annual basis, that one of the core things that we're tasked to doing is happening without our input, because that would be disturbing on any number of fronts, and frankly an anathema to the very notion of being nuclear free. So
It's merely a reflection of a lack of understanding of what the process is by the people involved. And so there's a certain amount of public education that the committee could do with various department heads to remind them that this is part of the city purchasing process, that if there is the possibility that something they want to purchase might be from a prohibited company, they're supposed to notify you at that time so you can work with them to find an alternative. And that's really what I'm urging you to do.
If I can just get a little clarification, because I'm not sure what you're talking about either, because my reaction was the same as Mr. Rini's, that news to me. Were you talking about police radios?
Yeah.
Because you said about a year ago, but I think that was way more than a year ago.
ages ago.
No.
There were a police radio waiver that was considered, and as far as I know, timely reviewed and approved. And I believe that Motorola, as I recall. And that was many, it seems like many years ago.
The original
Time
waiver.
flies, but it wasn't last year.
That was the original waiver, yes.
Okay, well, there's a
And then it was
subsequent one.
modified, yeah.
Well, they came for
Okay.
another purchase,
County.
and as part of the process, essentially, the committee is supposed to indicate whether, in fact, the waiver is still, justified and so on. Rather than, yes, the original, I should have clarified this. I always talk a little faster than I should. The waiver was given many years ago, as I recall now. But last year we had a purchase of radios, and it would have been helpful at the time for the committee to have weighed in at that moment.
Well, we're happy to weigh in, no question. However, I just would like a little clarification on what you're suggesting. I don't know how many city managers there are in the city of Tacoma Park. Maybe I should know that. But maybe we could coordinate with one of them, the so-called city manager herself, and find out what, as the leader of the day-to-day operations of the city, what she recommends we do, so that I'm not disturbing the daily functions of all whoever the city managers
And
are.
that's
of the
exactly
city.
what I'm urging.
Okay.
I'll pass the information along to the city manager. And one of the recommendations I believe you had made before, which I think is something that we wanted to have, was that in the cover sheet it would be clear that that conversation had taken place in advance.
Great. We'll look forward to working more closely with the city on those matters.
And if I can just ask a follow-up question to that, which gets to your earlier point about the Nuclear Free America list and the difficulty with coming up with that list. In order to know whether something needs a waiver or not, we need a list to go by. And my sense is that we haven't, that the council hasn't seen a revision to the list, which I know that we used to kind of accept or, kind of adopt as the current list in quite some time. Do you know how long it's been?
I think it's 2003, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
I'm not sure when the last one is, but you're absolutely right. It's ripe for review, overripe for review, in fact. So, again, that is a high priority for us to try and get back to the city with a suggestion on how we can maintain an adequate list. In the meantime, the city is certainly welcome to contact us if there's any question about, whether a particular company ought to still be on the list or whether we should be entertaining a waiver. I do remember at one point, and it wasn't in the last year, we were able to navigate through an issue by concluding that a company that was on the list really didn't need to be on the list. So we've had a good working relationship with the city. I wouldn't characterize it as needing any major brain surgery, but to the extent we need to coordinate a little bit more effectively, then so be it. And I think that's a positive, and we look forward to engaging your office and Jesse's office and everyone else's office as appropriate.
Yeah, because my sense was that it's been 5, 6, 7, 8 years since we've
the list
adopted a
needs to
list.
there's no question the list needs to be updated, and we need to do it in a way that's rational and that you can rely upon it. So, and given the lack of good information, that's kind of where we're stuck for now, but we are working on it and understand it's a high priority.
I may, with a change in administration, we'll have to see, obviously the FOIA situation has changed in the first few days, I think, of the new administration quite dramatically. So that may enhance the opportunity for Nuclear Free America to get back in the saddle on this and update the list more easily. But obviously there was an 8-year period where it was very difficult, and I think that's about the times we're looking at. I think it was 2003 that I recall that's the version you have. But Jay knows, unfortunately he's not here, he knows better than I. But
Yeah, just because I probably the only people up here who have the experience of actually having adopted a list is myself on the council, and the deputy city manager was here, and probably beyond that, there isn't anybody up here who's had to deal with it, and knowing that the list was about yay thick, and you could go through and find the names, and either they were on the list or they weren't on the list, and I would imagine now you could say, well, they were on that list, but whether they still do that or not, we have no idea. Whether technically, somebody could say, well, you could say, well, we're not purchasing from them because they were on the list, and a representative from that company could come in and say, we've been, we haven't done that for years, and of course you can purchase from us. So, yeah, it would be very helpful to have that. Councilmember Sanders.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm certainly not old enough to remember when Mayor Williams did that.
I believe you were here.
But I thank you so much for the report tonight. A year ago, when you came to the council, my concern was that the Nuclear Free Committee not rest on its laurels and say that just because we had a list, that's all the Nuclear Free Committee should do. And I am pleased to see that that's exactly what you did, is not rest, but to look forward to what else you can do to make us really a nuclear-free city. To my way of thinking, there are 3 things that come to mind. One is the current purchasing restrictions, the policy that this council has, is to make sure that that's working well and continues to work. And again, you've discussed that, so I'm pleased with that. And I like you coming here and asking, what is it that we should be working on? I think that's something that we should be doing with all the committees. Secondly, and again, it's something you talked about, is how can we upgrade the purchasing restrictions? And again, you've talked about that with looking into maybe restricting our use of nuclear-generated electricity. There may be other things. Again, that's item number 2. And then item number 3 is the making sure that nuclear material stays out of Tacoma Park to the extent that is reasonable. I think we're not talking about keeping it out of our hospitals by any means, but the transportation of nuclear materials through the city or next to the city, I think is, again, an initiative that you need to stay current on and advise the council as things progress. And that's my list. And I, again, thank you for coming tonight, and I thank you for the energy that you're putting into the committee.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you also so much for the energy. I won't repeat all the things that Terry said, although I agree with all of them. Do want to highlight the purchase of nuclear power. When I came to the anniversary celebration, I was very interested to learn about that, and definitely saw the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And I think that it would be good if the committee could actually, as quickly as possible, get to us something in writing about that connection and your ideas about solving it. I would agree with Councilmember Snipper that I think there's an easy solution. We can just, starting next budget year, buy all renewable energy. We went up to 20% this year. I think we can go to 100%, but I'd like to have that report pretty quickly because I'd like it to be considered in the budget cycle, which is fast approaching for us. We have to approve the budget by July 1, and we'll start our budget deliberations soon. So I think we'd all like to be informed about that and be able to factor it into the budget discussions.
Councilmember Robinson.
Thank you all for coming here and giving us your report. I'm going to talk a little bit broadly and then kind of come down to the notion of yearly goals, which I support also. And broadly, in a way, you're kind of our emissaries to the outside world. It's that dove and the sign and what people perceive us as trying to do in Tacoma Park. I mean, this is something that many people associate with Tacoma Park. And at the same time, the committee has kind of been, put a couple things down there, kind of quasi-judicial. You've told us what we can't do or what we can do. So it's almost a judicial function. And it's also kind of restrictive or almost reactive. You know, these are things, this is, it's in a sense a negative thing. Don't go there. But now I hear you talking about things that are more proactive, and that connection with peace, which is certainly what the dove represents, and with environmental justice and those proactive things. I'm very happy to hear you talking about that. I'm glad of that sort of shift. Not to say that the restrictive aspect should be abandoned. Certainly not. But I think that you're in a position to work with the other committees that we have, or the other elements, the solar collectors over parking lots. What a great idea! Well, you know, all the other things that we could do. And okay, now to some specifics. Linda and Julia, are you planning on re-upping? Because I see that your expiration dates on the terms are in 2 weeks.
Again? I get one of these like every month. I'm not sure what's happening.
Well, this is just
re-upped. I did re-up.
You did re-up. Oh,
yeah.
Good. All right.
And then it didn't last a year, and I got another one. I re-upped again.
Okay. Well, it says they're 2-year terms, and just on our little sheet here, our little info sheet, it says that in 2 weeks you're gone.
If
So
I get another notice, I'll re-up again.
just checking. Okay. So I'm glad to hear it. On that, on the broader environmental issues, I've been in contact with a guy named Mike Kennedy, and I'll pass his contact information to you. He's trying to build a model that will go nationally that will create a cooperative that's energy-based so that people contribute to this cooperative, and he's hoping to get maybe 1,000 people to put in $1,000 or a couple $1,000 and then use that money for bulk or group purchases of things like solar panels for homes or other uses. And I think that could be a very powerful tool because it could have some real dollars behind it. And I'm sure that he'd be interested in talking to you and other environmental groups we have in the city about how best to approach that, the use of that money and the people who would sign up. So I'll get you his contact information. And in that light, I encourage you to work with the other committees on that notion of how to achieve environmental justice. And so now to the yearly goals. I just heard Councilmember Wright say, wouldn't it be great when you come here next year to tell us how we're doing on the renewable energy component of our own budget. And I wonder if there are other goals for next year that you think you ought to pursue, so that we can then have that in our minds and ask you next year when you come back. What specific things can you see doing by next year? You don't have to answer right now, but I put it to you.
Well, I take some of your sense of the restrictiveness of what we do and turn it to flip it to its positive side. Who is good environmentally? Who is good environmentally? Who's not like 3M, who we were contacted from Berkeley about, who says, well, we're not telling if we're nuclear free. We're not saying whether we are or not. So that finding out any specifics is a whole lot of work. But who are providers up there aside from sustainables that it's a real pleasure to support and draw from.
I think it's a great idea that you suggested we create measurable goals for ourselves and our committee, and I think that's something we'll take back to our committee meetings and talk about that, so we can give you an informed, thoughtful response.
Great.
And do you have any sense of when we can hope to have some word on adoption of some kind of list or alternative source of list, or any process for getting back on that?
Well, we'll certainly get back to you. Just to be able to put a time frame to it, we'd be able to, historically, we purchased that from a third party, or the city has with our recommendation. So to drill down one further level, that person has told us that he can no longer publish that list, okay, because he doesn't have access to the same information that he used to have access to under previous administrations. So we've asked him how else could we update the list, and we're waiting on a response from him. We've also done some research in the libraries about whether we can get some assistance from some experts associated with the libraries in terms of doing research. And their answer to us is that we could review the Securities and Exchange Commission filings by all the companies on the list, or I guess all the companies that file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Very arduous task.
I was going to say, that'll keep you busy.
So far, to be candid with you, we don't have a good option. I mean, the best option was there was this third party that, as part of a living that he made, published this list. So our pledge to you is that we're looking into how we could update this list to give you a list, an updated list, that you can rely upon as you have for almost 25 years. But I can't tell you when I could have you that list because of the obstacles that we've encountered thus far. But we do meet regularly, almost every other month, sometimes more often than that if business requires it. So we'll continue to grind at that, and as soon as we have a good answer, we'll be back to you.
And if you can let us know if there's anything we can do to help.
Appreciate that.
Renewables always.
One little update just on the transportation issue, because that came up in the discussion about the station and whether or not nuclear materials will be transported through. And the more immediate, although it wasn't completely immediate, but within the 2-year prospect of that happening was if the Yucca Mountain high-level radioactive waste dump was to open, which, as you probably know, Obama's canceled. So that doesn't mean the problem has gone away. It just means it won't go there. So one of the things that at least outside of my committee purview, my working life, I'm watchdogging is what other options are going to be brought forward. And to address the environmental justice issue, one of the possible ones is interim storage, which will likely go to Native American reservations, which will still mean that radioactive waste would be transported through Tacoma Park to an even worse destination, potentially, than Yucca Mountain, which was already pretty bad. So it's something that will continue to watchdog, even though the Yucca Mountain dump got cancelled. It's still on the horizon that there could be waste coming through the station.
You'll no doubt want to put that on our list, because so long as there's no nuclear waste traveling through Tacoma Park, when we come back here next year, we will have succeeded in our little way. Acting locally and thinking globally.
Take on CSX.
We'll make sure we contact the ICC as well. Interstate Commerce Commission, not the road.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to the legislative update.
We've got Ann Seacott and Michelle Douglas from Seacott and Elliott here to brief us on what has been a very busy time working on behalf of the City of Tacoma Park. Ann, Michelle? Thank you. I did pass out the information that you had provided.
Thank you. Well, first let me say what a pleasure it is working with all of you. It has really been lovely. We both enjoy working on the city issues, and working with all of you and your investment in coming into Annapolis, as well as providing us the information we need to be able to do our jobs well. So thank you to all of you for that.
And I can say it's a mutual admiration society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We thought what we do is sort of run through the issues that we know are your top priorities on the cover sheet that I believe Susie has handed out to everyone. I'm going to kick it off by talking about program open space. At this point, there has been the committee has worked on marking up Senate Bill 163, which is the department's attempt to make sure that monies for program open space continue to be able to be used for indoor recreation. We've had a lot of meetings with senators around this bill, and there's another bill by Senator Harris that's related to program open space having to do with impervious surfaces. And so those two bills have been taken up together within the committee. The lead on these bills will be Senator Pinsky, and we've had numerous discussions with him. He's very clear with me that he doesn't want to do anything in the bill to hurt the project that Tacoma Park is looking to continue. He's clear that he wants to continue being able to fund indoor recreation, although there is a lot of pushback from a number of members on the committee to not fund any indoor recreation. For some of those who are pushing back on that issue, we have discussed the option of, if you are going to say absolutely no to indoor recreation, will you at least consider the option of grandfathering this in for a year? And so far, from many of those folks, we've gotten a yes. My impression is that there will be funding for indoor recreation. It will likely be limited in some fashion. I've provided to you on the cover sheet two of the amendments that Senator Pinsky is looking to advance. And he's clear that he wants to make the bill prospective so that anything that was in the pipeline prior to the enactment of this bill would not be affected. So we continue to have these discussions. I'm encouraged by his response to me to direct questions about the amendments, about what they're seeking to do. Again, though, the committee is still debating the various issues, and we will just stay on top of this bill.
And is everybody still talking the same way, which is that if this bill doesn't get through the Senate and cross over and get through the House, that there, by the interpretation of the existing regulations, that there would be no indoor uses, and therefore this bill has to go forward?
That would be correct. And I should say that tonight the House Companion was introduced, and I know that on the House side there are going to be some attempts by some other folks to strip away the provisions around the 7,500 square feet limitation moving forward. So there's still going to be some play between the two chambers on the bill, but it will have to go through all the way through. Something will have to pass because of the Attorney General's opinion that has put everything on hold at this point. It has been interesting in that there are conflicting Attorney General opinions. There is.
We know about those.
Yes. So that's a highly unusual case, although I will say that it happened in the just cause eviction too. And so to see it happen twice, to see it happen once is incredibly unusual. To see it happen twice, I've been down the 20 years, I've never seen it.
So you like Tacoma Park because we throw the real hard balls back with that.
We love it.
Yeah.
Love a challenge.
And my sense from having talked with various people down there about that very issue is that there could have been a lot more of those than there have been.
There are. The fact that there's one means there's a lot more of those than there ever has been. There has never been one before.
But
in the 20 years I've been there.
If people had worked things a little differently in the past, this could have come up a lot sooner and a lot more.
Yes.
So it's interesting that it's opened up this can of worms.
It has. It has. It's brought something to light that heretofore had not been an issue.
We ask you one at a time, or we're going to let them do the whole thing and then ask?
Oh, go ahead and ask.
So, if we can't use program open space for indoor recreation, let's say you're a city that is maxed out its open space, does that mean that we can take program open space money and purchase open space in other areas that we could like use for the summer camp and, you know, other kinds of, like, we could use our bus and we could take people out there.
Our borders, a new kind of annexation.
That would be creative. It has been an interesting debate among folks that, you know, you consider to be allies on the issue. That their take on this is that many of the counties aren't meeting the minimum threshold of what they should be doing to purchase literal open space. So they are trying to push a point that if the first order of business needs to be to preserve undeveloped land. So if one jurisdiction isn't ready or able, and I bring up the point of complete saturation, that there isn't anything left to purchase, they want to see the money going to another jurisdiction who can then purchase undeveloped land. I don't think that's going to be the prevailing end result, but that is part of the discussion.
Okay, that's interesting. Was the purpose of the program open space money exclusively to preserve open land, or was it, as we use it, for more for recreation and?
That is under debate as a result of these conflicting Assistant Attorney General opinions. The Department of Natural Resources says that the original intent is to both, one, preserve undeveloped land, and two, for recreational purposes, be it indoor or outdoor. The Attorney General opinion that is being used right now, not the department's, that had to do with the audit, says no, the purpose is solely for outdoor, be it undeveloped or recreational. So that led to a discussion of how do you have bathroom facilities, how do you have any of this if it can only be outdoor. So that's where part of the discussion is going. But so what's under debate is the whole purpose of program open space, and there is a lot of contention around that.
One of the points on that is that if you look at the regulations from the state level, to purchase open space, you're allowed to use, you don't have to have a match. It can be 100% state funds. And it's up to 75% for a development project. One of the proposals that Michelle showed me, one of the possible amendments, would change the proportion of payment for an indoor program to a 50%. So there is another approach, which is to basically make it more expensive.
The dual purpose of the program.
Right.
Well, if their objective is to secure open space, there are a lot cheaper ways to do it than flat out fee title purchase of the land. But thanks.
It's been an interesting debate.
I bet.
I'd be curious just on the intent. How long has the program been around, and has anyone gone back and looked at the debate that actually took place when it was first passed to understand the actual intent as opposed to a current interpretation of the law?
Actually, all of that has happened. It's been in place for about 30 years, and the department actually brought the original task force report that spawned into the legislation that created program open space that talked about part of the intent is for recreation, and it wasn't limited to outdoor. So, but current senators say, well, if that's the case, then we don't agree, and we think it should change. So, you know, even though that's been brought to their attention, there are some who either refute it or believe it should be used differently at this point in time. Again, Senator Pinsky is the lead on this bill, and he is clear that his intent is not to eliminate indoor recreation.
And I think that may be his position because he's been in the lead and because he has gotten probably the most communication from people about that issue.
And this this issue is something he has been a lead on for many years, so I do think he's very well versed on it, and he understands the problems that it would place on jurisdictions that already have something in the pipeline. And he understands that people need recreation 12 months of the year.
So maybe if you want to continue on to the other issues, I think we've gotten that one covered pretty well.
For the issue of sanctuary cities, it was certainly a concern of Tacoma Park that there was legislation in to prohibit that designation. That bill has been given an unfavorable report. I did include on the highlight sheet that there are still, however, for the most part, all of the anti-immigration bills are not going to be moving. There's concern, though, about the bill to restrict the MBA from issuing driver's licenses or IDs because the governor has publicly gotten behind the effort. My understanding is that the governor isn't working hard on the bills, but it's certainly gotten a lot of attention and certainly can gain some traction that way. And the city has been asked if they would weigh in on in opposition to the Senate bill, which is being heard this Wednesday. And we'll follow up with Susie on that. Do we want to do questions now, or?
Councilmember Robinson.
I was there during that a couple of weeks ago when that was covered, and there was a lot of discussion about December 31st. The federal requirement is going to, the clock will tick, and there will be a federal requirement which will come into play, maybe. Has there been any more discussion about that? Because that requirement seemed significant enough for people to be worrying about it.
I think that because that is potentially up in the air, that is what is, I think, the best, what gives the bill the odds that it won't pass. But I haven't heard any update on the timeline for changes at the federal level, the federal requirements.
Are you talking about, is it Real ID that you're talking about? Is that the-
Yes.
Yes.
And it didn't seem at the time that anything was going to happen soon, that it was going to be a waiting game until the end of the year, and then the Real ID might come into play or it might not.
Well, some of the states have actually sued the federal government on the Real ID, and so there might be quicker action than the end of the year. But as of last week, I hadn't heard that anything new had come out from the new administration about it yet. They had sued the previous administration.
It was a fascinating discussion, the 2-track and the 1-track, and who goes.
And it was also interesting that the speaker was in attendance for most of that, and it seemed that his point was that if things did go forward with a December 31 deadline, that they had to, in fact, act this session, and therefore something was going to have to be decided, which told me that something is going to pass.
I think it is the game of chicken. Are there, folks want to trust that there is something that's going to change at the federal level versus, what if we get stuck with this?
And on an unrelated bill, a couple of years ago, there was a federal law that was coming into place that Maryland had a contrary position to in the past. And so the legislation that was passed said, if this occurs, then this kicks in. So there is another possibility. I mean, I don't know that discussion has happened at all. But we have done this in the past in Maryland. So, there is place to play.
That makes sense.
Sure.
I'll look into if there's been discussion about the contingency. On rent control, while Montgomery County's rent control, I should have said rent stabilization, I apologize. While Montgomery County's local bill related to just cause eviction has been withdrawn, there are two bills that are in play right now that we are watching very closely, House Bill 1239 and House Bill 916. 1239 would simply prohibit prospectively local governments from enacting any type of rent stabilization program. And then House Bill 916, which has a Senate companion, would require that the state conduct a study anytime local, a county or municipal government wanted to enact any type of rent stabilization or affordability standard in their jurisdiction. And while on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of traction on the bills, there was concern because at the hearing on 1239, the proponents of the bill raised the study that University of Maryland did on Tacoma Park's rent stabilization program, and that this cost the state money, the state and the local government's money. And that argument seemed to raise some eyebrows because of the fiscal climate right now. So we're doing some follow-up with staff and the chair of the committee, Maggie McIntosh, and the chair of the Real Property Subcommittee, Delegate Virginia Claggett, to ensure, to counter the arguments and ensure the bills won't go anywhere. We're also working with Delegate Tom Hucker, who's on the House committee.
Let me make sure I understand what you just said. The point was raised that the study that was done by the University of Maryland cost the state money because it's the University of Maryland.
No, that the state is getting less property tax because of rent stabilization in Tacoma Park.
Okay, that part, I thought you were saying that the actual study cost the money.
No,
I think it
No, in
said
fact, the
$800,000, and it was about 50% to the county and 50% to the city.
That part I got.
But one of the things that's fascinating is that that bill would actually require that the University of Maryland or another similar entity do these kinds of studies at the state's cost.
Right, and that the answer back would, because of the nature of the way they set it up, would be 2 years.
It would absolutely delay any kind of implementation at the local level.
It's only for a new ordinance, right? It's not for anyone.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Prospective.
What an interesting notion, a fiscal impact study. I'm sure you could argue it both ways. Obviously, it could be argued that it cuts the state's revenue stream, but you could also say that it helps poor people, and then you could try to evaluate how much it helped them and so forth. Are you seeing this kind of fiscal impact study put out there for other things at the policy level? There was an environmental impact study movement that tried to grapple with the destruction of our environmental resources. So, but to have an impact on fiscal affairs.
No, I have.
Very interesting.
I'm not recalling any right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then related to the Just Cause eviction bill, there is a Prince George's County local bill that's been introduced that is almost verbatim Montgomery County's Just Cause eviction bill. And I had reached out to and have not heard back yet from folks that had been spending some time working on that at CASA, who had worked with us on the Montgomery County bill. And I had been told at one point that they might be amending the bill to more directly address retaliation. And so we're not sure if this bill is even going to move out of the Rules Committee. Right now it's in the Rules Committee. It hasn't moved out. We're digging around to try to figure out what's going to happen, because as written, it would be unconstitutional, based on the letter that we got on our bill. So I think the intent is, I think that's how it was drafted, I think the intent is to try to figure out a way to amend it, and obviously, we'll look for opportunities, if it's amended a certain way, to see if it could benefit.
And is my sense that it would remove that impediment if it were a Montgomery County and Prince George's County bill? If you have two home rule counties? Or does extending it to the municipalities in the two home rule counties then kind of take it back over into the home rule difficulty?
I don't know if extending it to two counties was enough.
Because I thought in my conversation with the Attorney General's office that was enough.
It was enough for Jim. Well,
We will
we'll
check
double
into
check,
that.
because obviously, if that is enough, then
That was with Mr. Varga.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Clay has a question.
on election
Hold on,
warrants,
hold on.
I'm sorry.
I'm still concerned that CASA's focus on retaliation is going to kind of blur the issue some. And because, a retaliation bill is different than a just cause eviction bill. And I wish that they would stop trying to ram the retaliation thing into the just cause eviction bill, because I think they're killing, it's a distraction. And my personal opinion, I don't support retaliation either. It's not that I don't want people to retaliate. It's just that, I really believe that if you resolve the just cause eviction issue, you will resolve most of the retaliation issue. And you're not going to get a retaliation bill that's going to pass, that's going to give people a year of protection or 2 years of protection. I don't know that they're going to get much more than 6 months, or maybe they'll get a year of protection. But no matter what you do, unless you flip the onus of proof from the tenant to the landlord, which is the difference between the retaliation approach and the just cause approach, you're not going to win cases. You're still going to have the same deal where the tenant has to come back and prove it. And it's why it is so easy to use the eviction process to discriminate and to get even with people that you don't like.
I do think that absent something passing this year, and I am going to wager that nothing will pass this year, that there won't be a local Prince George's County bill either. I think that there is ample time to work with CASA and lots of other advocates on something that will be very productive, hopefully for more than just one local jurisdiction, hopefully something that's either statewide or that potentially at least brings in several larger jurisdictions to specifically address just cause eviction. I think it is among some of the affordable housing advocates, I think the just cause eviction issue or standard is something that is liked. I think folks like that very much. I think there is a different. I think that there are two different agendas. Well, I think it's the same goal, but two means of trying to go at it, and I think there is room and time to come together on it. We'll work hard to do that.
And interestingly, other bills that have been introduced after the Prince George's County bill have been moved out of rules. So what we're trying to do is connect with different folks in Prince George's County to determine sort of whether it's going to just sit there, whether they are going to do something like amend it for retaliation to try to move it out. And we will certainly, take back the information about Mr. Varga and see if that takes away the home rule concern.
And I could be wrong, but that was my
It's worth
impression.
checking out. Thank you.
One last thing on that one. I continue to be perplexed by the eviction part of just cause eviction, and that's probably just my logical mind or something, because I've heard it explained really that it's just cause failure to renew. You need a just cause to fail to renew a lease. That's how I understand it. And I don't know how that all plays itself out grammatically, or, I mean, but I just throw that out there.
Right, and I guess part of the, we'll look at it. I think part of the answer is that the end result is that you are getting evicted, meaning against you're not willingly leaving.
That's
so, but it's semantics, and if we need to address
It's not so semantical to the poor family who's like out on the street, right?
On the election warranty, the bills have been heard. This is the bill that that doesn't highlight instant runoff voting. It is included that any new system, the vendor would have to do upgrades for a couple of years. That would include an upgrade for instant runoff voting. And I think the general feel is that the bills don't have enough support to get by the Board of Elections, which does not support the bill. The folks at Common Cause are, I think, they're the lead on the bill, and they are interested in seeing if there's some kind of compromise that could be worked out without legislation with the Board of Elections related to the bill, or in lieu of the bill, maybe some kind of inclusion in the contract. Back to actually Tacoma Park's original request about the being included, having IRV being included in the contract. So we're going to explore that with them and see if there's anything that the City Council is able to do to help make that happen. And finally, the Revenue Task Force. I had a conversation earlier today with Senator Roby's office, who's the sponsor in the House, the Senate, and was unaware that there had been an announcement made by the Senate President today. So I actually think you all have more updated information than we do.
Well, we did get out, I saw an announcement from Miller's office, and then I saw a follow-up from Scott Hancock, I guess, of MML, that simply stated that there would be a task force established. I believe it's 6 delegates, 6 senators.
7 senators, 7 delegates.
Oh, 7 and 7. But no local government representatives at all, and that the purpose primarily seemed to be to address the issue of teacher pensions, who should be responsible for teacher pensions. So it's really quite a different concept than the House Bill 484, Senate Bill 379. And it sounded, just from the tone of the emails, kind of a throwing up of hands and frustration, but I'm sure that there will be lots more work done on that to go back and say what the original point of this particular effort is, to actually have a coherent discussion about how you divide, who takes responsibilities for what kinds of revenues and between the state and county and municipal jurisdictions. So more on that to come. I'm sure there will be some discussion in the next couple days.
And we'll follow up in terms of, is there any salvaging that is able to be done?
Today's news left me thinking like, gee, that was a priority bill, but almost sounds like a number of people who thought it was a priority would want to oppose our own bill.
The issue of teacher pensions is certainly significant for the Senate President and who will fund them.
So that's the update on the priority issues, and then attached to the cover sheet is the long list of bills that we don't know every detail about, but that we are that we have flagged, some of which we've been keeping a closer eye on than others. in terms of some of the things that may impact Tacoma Park or your interests.
You don't know everything about these? I figured maybe in the time that you had to sit there waiting for this item to come up, you could have gotten all your updates on this.
Well, one of the things that's tough is that they'll say, here's 40 bills, do you have a concern about any of these by tomorrow? Fortunately, they usually kind of highlight what are key things, and I really appreciate that. But I recognize
our practice is to be more inclusive.
Right.
than-
which
We have a more expansive.
my gray hair continues, but I also appreciate that just there's been so many bills this year, and it's so active, and so I'm very happy to have some help.
Almost makes you long for the days when there was actually some money and that occupied them rather than all these other things.
Well, which does bring us to something we should probably talk a little bit about, just briefly in general,
But we don't
is
wanna
the
talk with
state
you about
budget.
money.
You don't want to talk about it? The budget decisions, as folks know from the budget subcommittees, were delayed last week. They may start at the end of this week, moving into next week. So at this point, we know that a lot is being looked at again and re-looked at. The issue of task forces and new commissions remains an issue for any piece of legislation that's out there. Anything that has a fiscal note is a problem. We expect in the next couple of weeks to have some cursory new information about the status of the budget, knowing that it's going to be pretty dire.
And knowing that the governor has said basically, tried to protect municipalities, but may not be able to at this point.
It's going to be tough.
So the budget numbers that the city manager is trying to guesstimate for the proposed budget we may in fact find that there are some changes that come
Right.
after the introduction of the budget.
Right, the protections of the county revenues, et cetera, are now all back on the table. And of course, the county executive just put out his budget today. But he's going to have to deal with changes, just as will be the trickle down to whatever changes, and it's completely difficult to predict.
Well, we can just all march over to AIG's headquarters and try and extract.
Get a golden parachute.
We'll extract the bonuses and bring them back.
Get a bonus and vacation. I think you get pretty good party trips out of them too, right?
I wasn't trying to get them for us. I was trying to get the money to help the budget. Councilmember Wright.
Just one budget item I wonder if you could look out for. I'm very curious about what's in the budget for Montgomery College, and in particular the CIP in the Tacoma Park campus. Because in the out years, I think it's either 2012 or 2013, there's a plan for a building on the existing campus, which we think they should build on the western campus. So I'd just be curious to know what's in there for anything on the Tacoma Park campus.
So you're interested in the capital side of the budget?
Yeah, oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll follow up with you on the details of that.
Because we keep assuming that, because they tell us that, no, we're not to that point yet, but if something is coming through, that could tell a different story.
Are you suggesting that they're sometimes not totally forthcoming with information?
No comment. Any other questions? Thank you both very much. And,
Thank you.
And might see you down there tomorrow.
Great.
Be going to Representative Hickson's St. Patrick's Day event.
Good. Wearing of the
You
green.
be good.
Or make sure you enjoy something for us. Please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all very much.
And our last item is the discussion of the proposed ride-on bus route changes.
Thank you. Yes, fairly significant changes are being proposed by Ride-On related to its routes and scheduling in the coming year. And I want to go through a couple clarifications. First of all, Ride-On did make some changes recently about some of its routes, including Route 18, which go into effect on April. So there's a western leg of Route 18 that goes from the Tacoma Metro up Fenton Street, which is being discontinued in April. And that is, it's only an occasional bus. But I just wanted to, some people have asked me, hasn't the decision already been made? Isn't there, won't this take effect in April? And that's a different Ride-On action that they had a public forum on some time ago, along with some other bus changes. The new round of changes is related to the Montgomery County budget. Each of the county departments was asked to make significant cuts, and Ride-On was no exception. And they went through and they identified routes where they felt there was some underutilization, and so they're proposing a slew of changes across Montgomery County. In the Tacoma Park area, they face a slightly different situation. First of all, we heavily use our buses, so there aren't a whole lot of underutilized routes or times. And so there's not a lot of cutting that is proposed in the Tacoma Park area. Nevertheless, about a year ago, the residents of Victory Tower started lobbying hard for a Ride-On connection that they could only take, that they could take just one bus to get from Victory Tower on Carroll Avenue, 6 blocks away and up the hill, down to this building to come to the senior programs and to use the Piney Branch pool. And so they had been putting forth their requests fairly persistently, and as Ride-On was making these various changes, they took that into account and looked at ways to provide that service while doing some reductions in the Tacoma Park area. So at this point, there's a series of changes that are proposed by Ride-On that it would affect the Tacoma Park area, and these will be considered, will be heard at the public forum on March 24th in Rockville, and then will be acted on for, they may take the comments that either are received by email or otherwise or from the public forum and make some changes to their proposal. It would be dependent on the county council's approval of their budget, but then these changes would go into effect, and they might be slightly different changes, but the changes would go into effect on July 1st. For the proposal that they have in front of us, in the Tacoma Park area, they would end the Route 3 service, which goes up Piney Branch Road and Dale Drive during rush hour time periods. And that's one that probably wouldn't have a lot of effect except for the folks on Dale Drive. The Route 15 is one of our most heavily used routes. They do feel that there are some evening hours when it's less used, so that they were going to spread out the frequency of the buses, but still have Route 15, which goes across the northern part of Tacoma Park. And but the buses would continue to be running until about the same late time that they go now. They would also reduce the frequency of buses in the evening hours for Route 17, which comes here on Maple Avenue. It goes to Langley Park, Maple Avenue, and then to downtown Silver Spring. And in that case, the evening buses will be a little more sporadic than the proposal for evening buses on the 15. The last one will still be at about the same time as the current Route 17, but it really won't be regular service. They'll just be an occasional bus. The big changes for the Tacoma Park area really have to do with Routes 18 and 25. Route 18 currently goes from the Tacoma Metro, pretty much the length of Carroll Avenue to University Boulevard, and then to Tacoma Langley and back. The proposal is to meet the request of the Victory Tower residents and have that bus go on Carroll Avenue past their building, make a left on Philadelphia, come down to Maple Avenue, go back up through the hospital to the Tacoma-Langley area, and then back that same route. That bus would be running all day long and would help pick up some of the slack from reducing the frequency of the Route 17 bus, which also is on Maple, and then on the higher parts of more northern parts of Carroll Avenue. The Route 25 bus, which currently goes from the Tacoma Metro down Maple Avenue and up Sligo Creek Parkway and into Houston Avenue and kind of circles around through the hospital and back, would change from a bus that runs all day long to one that would just run during rush hour. And so that means that people who rely on the Route 25 bus during the daytime won't see it in the middle of the day. And they won't see it, I think, on weekends. It means that the residents of Houston Avenue in particular would have two-way Route 25 bus service on rush hours, which, knowing Houston Avenue, they are going to go and see if two buses can get by and how that would function, because it's a narrow road with parking. But then it wouldn't have any service at all during non-rush hour periods. Similarly, the segment of Maple Avenue between Carroll Street and Philadelphia Avenue would only have the rush hour service and would not have any bus service at any other time.
From the Route 25,
From
17 would still be going.
The segment of Maple between Carroll Street and Philadelphia would not.
Okay.
The segment, it's Carroll Street in DC.
Right.
It actually goes, but I know I have to always remember that. But the segment past the apartment buildings will be served by Route 18 and Route 17, and at rush hour with Route 25. There's a good amount of material that I've tried to prepare. I'll tell you, the folks at Right On are swamped, and so I've had to try to create materials for them to get the word out to people. And so far, this is primarily on our website, and it needs to get out in flyers to people's homes, and it needs to be at bus stops, and it needs to be in a variety of other places. It will be in a fairly big spread in the next newsletter, which will be a timely one for getting email and letters in, but it will miss the cutoff for getting to the public forum. And so I will just say that because we've also lost the person who does our web updating on a regular basis, we're doing the best we can on that end. So any help that we can get from neighborhood associations, I'm going to try to get this out in a variety of ways to help getting the word out to folks, the better. We are having the major information translated into Spanish so that the flyers will be both in English and Spanish, but of course there are many other languages that are spoken in this area. We're also trying to have, one of the biggest challenges for me is that for the seniors at the Franklin and at Victory Tower, sometimes they need larger print, and so there's just large formatting of this is a little bit tough. And so I spent all day Saturday working on these things. It takes a good amount of time from different people, and I recognize the time is short, and so we're trying to put that out, but it has been a little bit difficult to get the word out. My overall sense of this is that Tacoma Park is well served by Right On bus service and will continue to be well served. In no case will people have to walk multiple blocks to get a bus. The folks on Maple and the folks on Houston do have other bus service that is possible to be used during non-rush hour times. I appreciate that Right On tried to address this request by residents of Tacoma Park to have a better connection. I do believe that Right On is open to modifications if there's a request for something, or if there's a particular concern that someone sees here. We would like to know about it. Councilmember Siemens will be testifying for the city at the public forum on the 24th. If there's comments that people want to put in, that are in addition to the kinds of things that we've had in the past resolution on this, on a ride-on service, or that you may share with me now, I'd like to hear that so we can have the appropriate testimony. Nevertheless, we've also proposed a city council resolution for April 6th, I believe, for the on the whole proposal. Once we've heard what some of the other folks might say at the public forum and the comments that come in, even though that's after the May 31st deadline for ride-on, I've promised to keep the staff apprised.
That's March 31st.
I'm sorry, March 31st, thank you. March 31st deadline for comments from ride-on. I've promised the staff that I'd be communicating with them up to the 31st, and understanding that a resolution not only goes to ride-on, but it also goes to the county council, who make the final funding decision on this action. So, I think that will be a useful, that resolution, even though it's past the March 31st deadline, will still be very much looked at and will be very useful, especially with the county council that does make the final decision on funding. One of the things that's not covered here is that in some of the discussions for the, when the first proposal to serve the Victory Tower request were discussed, there was an additional item that the folks on Maple Avenue might like to get to the Long Branch Commercial District, to the Giant, in a more direct way, because they don't have a direct bus route there. These proposals did not include that option, and one of the things that it's a possibility they could change the Route 25 not to be extended to Tacoma Langley, but to be extended to the Piney Branch Arliss Circle. But that would be during rush hour time, and the primary use of getting to the Giant is to not do it at rush hour. One of the other things that Deanna Archie of Ride On has told me is that, that as more money comes online in future years, they could modify and expand some of these routes, but that they did have to do cuts. And so what they tried to do with Tacoma Park was just not increase the cost. So a lot of this is rebalancing the costs in the Tacoma Park area, trying to meet the needs that we have.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. I spent a lot of time looking at these because I ride these buses. And I do want to say, in fairness to Ride On, I think they made service cuts in a way that maximizes the parts of the routes that carry the most passengers. So I understand why they did what they did. But I did have a question which would be a little hard to answer, and it pertains to the idea that, as you indicated, Tacoma Park is a very heavy, an area that uses the buses very heavily, and I wonder if other areas of the county have as heavy a ridership as we do. And so the question really is, did they do the cuts sort of, 5 or 10% on every route, or did they take account of how heavy the use is?
I don't have the exact numbers, but in my discussion with the Ride On staff, it sounded like they looked at it from a county-wide perspective, and so Tacoma Park took less of a hit than other places in that respect.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think they certainly respect places where there's heavy ridership, and it's not useful to them to cut back on frequency and then have overcrowded buses that break down. So, I mean, I think they have to find the balance. So I don't have the exact numbers, but it was one of the things that was clear was that they weren't going to move forward on the request by the Victory Tower residents, given in a quick manner, until the axe came down that they had to cut and they had to make some serious changes, and they were able to balance this out as part of their answer county-wide. So they took advantage of this opportunity of rethinking a lot of routes to include the Tacoma Park request. And so I think there is some reduction in service, but it's not a significant reduction.
Yeah, I do think the one concern I have about the reduction in service on Houston and to an extent Maple is that the topography is not flat in these areas. So folks going to either shopping, the hospital, the metro station, and so on, the alternate routes will be hikes uphill. It's not just I have to walk 2 blocks or 3 blocks to get a bus.
Right.
It's I have to walk some pretty steep hills.
Right. Well, I think that's a very important point. I mean, that certainly was part of the reason the Victory Tower folks requested a bus, because they couldn't come down or up the hill. But the area up from Sligo Creek in your neighborhood is a significant hill and is a significant area. It's part of the reason why, when we were talking about trying to have some connection from Maple Avenue to the Long Branch Commercial District, that taking it up through that route made sense to serve that neighborhood. That you know, it's one thing to walk uphill to catch the bus to go to work. It's another thing to walk up with groceries or do something like that. That's more difficult.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Susie, I think as we think about the testimony that we want to give, there are a couple points that we need to make. I mean, certainly, I think we need to be sympathetic with the cutbacks that Ride-On is trying to make, and kind of sympathetic with the council and the budget challenges that they face this year. But I'm concerned as I look at this and knowing my constituents and the other city residents that, you know, as people of lower income are facing the economic challenges that we're experiencing right now and expect for the next year or so, I would expect bus ridership to increase rather than decrease. And I think as people try to save money and cut back, I think this is part of the safety net. Maybe not the first tier, but it is a way that people can save money and still accomplish the things that they need to accomplish in life, getting to their jobs and getting home, but also getting to the grocery store and getting back. And the latter doesn't happen during the rush hour if you're going back and forth to work. And I think that's a point we need to stress. And the other thing I think would be helpful is to look at, and I know it's been, it's an old census now, but I believe my recollection of the 2000 census is that some of the neighborhoods where they're decreasing the bus service are also the lowest percentage of car ownership in the city and in the county, for that matter. And so what it means to me is that there are a great number of people in these neighborhoods that are going to be left with no alternative other than hoof power, and a number of them don't have the physical capacity to do that. And taxi cabs sound nice and might be appropriate for people in some of the neighborhoods where they're decreasing the service. But I know that for many of my constituents, and I believe the same is true with many of Councilmember Snipper's constituents, they don't have the means to pay for taxi service to go get their groceries or to go pick their kids up at daycare or get to their jobs. So I think those are all points that need to be made in the testimony.
Yeah, I think that's good. Clearly, the neighborhoods along Maple Avenue and then up in the Houston Roanoke area have very low car ownership, and not many places for folks to park if they have a car. So even if somebody wanted and could afford a car, it's not necessarily something that they choose to do because it's just not parking available for them either. So good points. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I do have one other point that I neglected to say. This has to do with the impact on the hospital. The hospital currently receives service by Route 17 and by Route 25, kind of as in a one-way direction. The Route 25 would be ended going through the hospital, but Route 18 would go both ways through the hospital grounds. I think that that's probably a win for employees of the hospital and folks who are trying to get to doctor's appointments at the hospital, especially on Route 18, where you can come either direction from Tacoma Langley or the Tacoma Metro, and I think that's very useful.
It's a win unless they're living in Mr. Snipper's neighborhood.
Well, yes, but I'm talking primarily, that's true for residents on Houston. But I think that there is an increase, and one of the things that's useful about the Route 18 route in both directions through the hospital grounds is it allows a number of people to actually get into the hospital property. Folks like, for example, again at Victory Tower, can take the 12 or the 13 bus up Carroll Avenue, but you're left off at the bottom of the hill there on Carroll, and you've got to walk quite a ways up to the hospital proper, which is difficult for people who...
No, I agree. It's a gain for them, but it's obviously not just a loss, but it's a cessation of an ability to get to the hospital on a bus.
Yes. For a couple blocks on Houston, that's correct. One of the things that...
and the adjacent streets
and the adjacent streets that feed into that.
Houston.
That's correct. One of the things that I think is most important about all of this is that people don't read much about bus routes. You find out about where to go for the bus by your neighbor. You get used to always showing up at 7:52 at your local stop. And these are fairly significant changes. Even on a route that continues the same, like the 17, will have a different schedule if these are adopted. And so getting the word out to all the folks in different languages and people who don't necessarily pay attention to these things is, I think, going to be quite a challenge. So that part of my thinking in all this is once a decision is made by Ride-On, the communication that we have to do, I think, will continue to be quite a challenge for us.
If I recall correctly, this public testimony at Ride-On is next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow. Is that correct? And so I would like to suggest to Councilmember Snipper that maybe we hold a public forum ourselves prior to that time and do some flyering of our neighborhoods to try to get some of the residents out, because I think waiting to get people involved until after the decision is made is probably not the most productive.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is getting the word out.
Right.
And I mean,
But Mr. Snipper is as old as me, and with great experience in activism, I'm sure that he and I can get some people aware of what's going on and get them to come in and at least, not everybody, but at least some of the residents participate.
if you want to do that, I mean, it's a very quick turnaround.
It is.
And that's part of the reason. Yeah, that's part of the reason that we tried to pick the April 6th time to be able to come before you guys for a resolution. But if
Okay,
that's
I'll talk with Mr. Snipper offline about that and see what we can do.
Okay.
Councilmember Wright.
I'm not sure where Ride-On saves money and how, exactly, but I think, Terry and Ruben, if we studied 18 and 25, there actually is a way to potentially add the Houston loop back in. And then, 25 is only going to be running part-time. Now, I guess it just doesn't and since it's going to be coming down, the new 18 will come down along Maple. It seems like maybe one trade-off might be to have just one route that's a little longer and doing away with the 25 route. I would just look at it. I don't know if that we'll see if
I'm sorry, I'm trying to follow you. Do away with the 25 and replace it with what?
you just use the 18 route, but I think you could add a little loop on that goes on Sligo Creek Parkway in Houston and Houston, and loops back to the hospital still.
That little piece where it goes Sligo Creek, Houston.
Yeah. It's sort of hard to tell. If you look at the back of this, there's kind of these two maps kind of comparing. It's a little bit hard to tell exactly.
All right. I thank you for your suggestion and think that it's going to have to be something we do over the kitchen table rather than the council table.
Yeah, no, I was pointing that out.
I think it's a good idea, because even if they did, once an hour during the day, that would help folks.
Yeah. Because I can say, at least for the people on the 25 route who are between Philadelphia and Carroll, I happen to live there. Everyone just walks to the metro. No one waits for the bus. There's one person who might at the end of the street, but they could just go across Philadelphia and catch the bus in Philadelphia. So if that in any way helps you, people between Carroll and Carroll and Philadelphia on Maple are not going to be opposed to that.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one last request, and that is, I know that Councilmember Clay came tonight equipped to make special requests and to fulfill things, and I wonder if you could use your magic wand and just make this all okay? Thank you.
Done.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.